Good morning, friends and distinguished guests. A warm welcome for those who are returning from day one and day two, and a special welcome to our new audience. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a great community. My name is Elias Felfoul. I have been with WISE 7 years, supporting the policy development and partnership pillar. It is an honor to serve as your MC today and help with transition for the morning and the evening session. Let me start with housekeeping announcement first. As you may see, you have a chat feature on the right side. Please use it to post comments. If you have a question, please make sure to select the mark as a question option found at the bottom next to chat mode. For those who would like to post on social media, please use hashtag Education Reimagined as your tweet or post about today. Our handle is at capital WISE dash capital T WEETS at WISE dash tweets. As I onboard you today on the topic that we will discuss, please answer the poll question that will be posted on the chat feature. We will ask two questions in the next few seconds, and another one before the end of this introduction. First, we want to know, where are you joining us from? And the second question will be about your role in education. We appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions. Before we talk about the program today, I would like to mention some highlights from yesterday. As the keynote of the day, Safina Hussein, founder of Educate Girls, gave a powerful speech that highlighted the importance of student agency, especially for young girls, by empowering them through education. We in turn have the power to influence society at large and can create a more inclusive world for all of us. Another inspiring speaker came from Medellin, Colombia. Mayor Danielle Quintero also honored us with a discussion on how he might better support those most vulnerable in our communities by leveraging existing technologies and social policies. And I highly recommend you to look at the success story of the city of Medellin in Colombia. Finally, Mike Ferrick, founder and CEO of Allison, urged us to rethink what we consider to be a modern education. If we are to see real change, education must no longer be considered as the mainstay of academic institutions, but rather an agile series of systems and tools that allow students to realize agency beyond the classroom. All our speakers yesterday underlined the need to include all stakeholders in the development of future learning ecosystems and emphasized the power of the learners at its center. During today's session, we'll be examining how the tech sector can enrich education, from helping us bridge deep economic and digital divides to creating new opportunities for collaboration and innovation. Some of the key questions: how can we use technology to prepare students for a 21st century context and ensure readiness for a modern labor market? How do we use cross-sector collaborations to create sustainable pathways to learning in and out of classroom? And in a post-COVID-19 world, what new challenges and opportunities does the world now offer to entrepreneurs looking to positively impact the education landscape? Before we jump into the next segment, we will post this last question. We would once again like to hear from you. What do you believe is the most promising way that EdTech is likely to improve learning in the future? I will comment these answers later on. So I am looking forward to seeing your responses. We have a video for you before we start the keynote. Yesterday, my colleague Amina Hussein introduced that the WISE team has pre-selected young voices from Education City in our Learner's Voice program. These young voices will answer questions that aim to give insight into their experiences as students during this pandemic, how they've overcome recent challenges, and what changes they hope to see in the education sector as a result. This morning, we will be hearing from Maha Asid, a recent graduate from Northwestern University in Qatar. Please go ahead with the video.
My name is Maha Asid. I am a recent graduate from Northwestern University in Qatar, where I majored in media industries and technologies. In Northwestern, I was an international student who came from Tunisia 4 years ago, and my main interests are media industries and filmmaking. The challenges that I have faced as a result of COVID-19 kind of came from two different areas. The first one was being a media student. Our industry requires a lot of insight work, whether it's filmmaking, production, or theater or research. A lot of what we do is based on, being on site with people and working in teams. And since that was not possible because of the pandemic, a lot of it had to change. An example for that was when we took our theater class in my last semester was creative collaboration with Professor Ann Woodworth. It was in the middle of the semester when we had to all go home and we're not allowed in school anymore. And at that point, we had already started like blocking and production and character working. And then we had to shift our work completely and find ways to pull off a virtual play for the first time in the region. And that required a lot of flexibility and a lot of experimentation and just being open-minded to all possibilities and including things that are not really part of theater, like technology. And yeah, it was definitely a very different experience. The second area was being an international student. Having to self-isolate in a dorm room is definitely a different experience. I think just trying to stay mentally healthy was a challenge because it's not as you are with your family or in your country, having to follow the news in Qatar but also back home and being worried about your family because you can't really grasp their situation and because you're not there. So yeah, definitely being an expat and an international student in a different country was very challenging.
Okay. The entire page.
I think schools have to start listening more to the students, to their experiences and to their perspective, whether it's faculty, teachers, or staff. It's very important to put the students' experience as a priority. I know some schools do have that, but let's be real, like the majority of our institutions kind of put students all in the same boxes, and that is not fair, and I don't think it's productive either, because each student comes from a very different background and has their own experience, and it's very important to have that spectrum, to have that variety, and to take into consideration that people respond to experiences like a global pandemic differently. And I think now with COVID-19, this is all has become way clearer than before, and it is time for us to take action. It's time for the students to feel like they're being heard and they're able to lead, because if they can, then I'm pretty sure that their performance, whether it's academic, whether it's, you know, their personal lives, it's going to be way better and way more comfortable.
Well, that's indeed. I think a lot of us have been under such circumstances and learn basically to adapt with this new reality. So great to hear from our young voices. We're getting now into the main part of this program, and I'm extremely happy to start this day by introducing our keynote speaker, who is a very interesting and influential woman who wears many hats. I had the opportunity to meet her in person in Beijing and got the chance to see her implication in education with kids from different backgrounds in China. I have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Yang Lan, co-founder and chairperson of the Sun Media Group and the Sun Culture Foundation. She's a household name in China. She is a leading broadcast journalist and a media entrepreneur. She is the only person who have represented Beijing twice for its successful Olympic biddings. She was also named as Goodwill Ambassador for 2010 Shanghai Expo. Mrs. Yang has honored with many awards, including Columbia University CIPA's Global Leadership Awards, and she is one of the world's 100 most powerful women by Forbes. Without any further ado, I would like to invite Mrs. Yang to address the audience, and following the keynote, a conversation with Mr. Stavros Yanuka, CEO of WISE, will happen. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Good morning at Qatar. This is afternoon time in China. Just want to thank our moderator, thank the organizing team to invite me to attend this very innovative and very important conference to highlight the changes and the challenges we're facing, but also, and maybe more so, the opportunities that we can redefine and reimagine education for more equity, inclusivity, and progress in the society. So today, the point or the theme I want to bring on the table is how to invite or to engage cross-sectional participation and communication, especially to mobilize children themselves in the process of education. During the pandemic, although we are dealing with some of the immediate impact of the coronavirus, and we can see that the school, our social life, our workplace are all disrupted by the coronavirus. But I think to solve the immediate challenges or crisis, we also need to look ahead of us. You know, what if in another 2 or 3 years of time, and we look back today, we could be confident enough to say that the decisions or the judgments or the choices we made today make sense for the days to come. I think this is the perspective that we need to bring into our conversation, especially when we talk about education, talking about the young people who will be the mainstream in the future. During the pandemic, my foundation, Sun Future Art Education Foundation, initiated a program to involve the most vulnerable communities and demographic of our society, namely the children from the more impoverished areas in China, in the rural villages, as well as from schools of migrant workers. Their parents' life have been most severely impacted during the pandemic. And we started the initiative and a project called Everyday Love. We invited more than 100 kids from these schools to tell their side of the story of the pandemic and how they discovered the power of love and caring and also resilience in their communities and in their own lives. So first of all, I'd like to show a short video exhibiting some of their artworks to all of you. Would you please play the video?
The year of 2020, we are attacked by a terrible virus. It makes it difficult for people to breathe. The virus is invisible and sneaky. The year of 2020, we are attacked by a terrible The year of 2020, we are attacked by a terrible virus. It makes it difficult for people to breathe. The virus is invisible and sneaky. My hometown is now a battlefield. Mom is very nervous, reminding me constantly to wash my hands. Even if I just cough lightly, the whole family immediately turn to me and ask, "Are you all right?" There's no traffic in the city. My dad is a mechanic, and his repair store has no business. I have never seen him so worried. My uncle and aunt are doctors. They are determined to beat the virus. They are fighting as warriors. My teacher texts everyone in the class in the evening to check whether we are safe.
Yes. So as I said, I think we need cross-sectional participation and communication to amplify the impact of the stories told by these children, and also the messages of caring, of support, of unity that these works have brought to us as a society. Through social media, for example, the previous video and all these works by children have been viewed by more than 15 million people in China alone, and many of the viewers showed their support and appreciation of these children's work. Next page. We also put the posters in the Beijing subways, where more than 500,000 people per day pass by. So you can see these are the transport, the people who are taking transportation and point to the posters to see the works of our children. Next page. We also set up an exhibition in a landmark building in Beijing, where citizens and people are visiting them once the society is reopened. Many of them took pictures, they wrote postcards, and they make comments on these works and send those comments back to the schools and back to the children. Next. As you can see, some of our leaders in a community, here's a lady from the National Charity Alliance to write a postcard to the children who created some of those paintings, and see how happy the children are when receiving these messages of support and appreciation from adults and from the viewers of their work. Next. And then we also give these postcards, as I can show you here. We give these postcards to children where they can write their messages to the people that they care about. And in this page, you can see they send of hundreds of postcards to the doctors and the nurses at the forefront of this battle against the COVID-19. And these doctors and nurses have been fighting selflessly with all their heart to take care of the sick and to take care of those in need. And they are very moved and inspired by the children's work. So by sending these messages through different sectors of the society, we are creating a good momentum of positive energy between people, between our hearts. Next. I also brought the story to the international audience through Call to Unite, a live streaming event about 2 months ago. It was initiated by Mr. Tim Shriver, the chairman and CEO of Special Olympic Movement in the world, on which board I'm also serving as a member, as well as such celebrities as Julia Roberts and Oprah Winfrey and many others. So this is the chance to connect with a larger society and community in the world. During this streaming, Tim Shriver asked me the question, how I discovered the resilience among these most vulnerable children in our society. I said 2 things. One is self-discipline. I found that these children are extremely well behaved during the pandemic. They know how to wear masks, how to protect themselves, their families, and also people in the neighborhood by exercising good self-discipline and quarantine. And secondly, they reach out to other people who are in need, as we can see from their stories of their families, their parents, their neighborhood, their classmates, their grandparents, how they try to help each other, although they are the most underprivileged demographic of our society. So this energy is very powerful in terms of helping each other. And I also reminded the international community that children are watching us as adults, how we behave in front of a crisis, how we support each other, how we get united, and how we tackle all these shortages and difficulties during this pandemic. And we are showing good examples, and we have the obligation to show good examples to our children. Next. Here, I want to brief all of you a little bit about the background of Enlightenment of Love. This is a program initiated by our foundation. This is not just to enhance the artistic capabilities or the skill set of children to create art pieces, but rather it is to enhance social and emotional intelligence and the capacity of children for their self-esteem, for the integration to the society, and also to build up a sense of connectivity and service to the community. Throughout the past 6 years, we have benefited more than 1.3 million children through more than up to 100, almost 100 schools throughout China. And these children are taking these classes as their extra curriculum activities every week. And we have involved the teachers, the schools, the parents, and especially the communities and children in the learning process. As we are emphasizing innovating education for the future, I think it's a key element, a factor to consider, which is to mobilize children themselves. So this is not teacher-centered or the givers-centered, but rather children-centered learning process. So we made a lot of effort in the designing of the curriculum, as well as the way of teaching. We helped to train hundreds of teachers from these schools in need to innovate the way of education, to engage people, to engage the children in the learning process. Next. Here's a very lovely picture of all the kids who are coming back to school after the pandemic is being controlled in most parts of China. So finally, they are revealing their happy face when taking their masks off. Next. I want to show you another picture. This is from a program, the program before the pandemic. This is a demonstration of how we involve families and parents in the process of learning. In our program, there's a one lesson called "The Best Dish in My Family." So children are taking pictures and also painting artworks to demonstrate the best dish in their family. And afterwards, we ask the children to vote for the most favorable dish. And we ask those parents to come to the kitchen, into the schools, and actually cook for the whole school. So this is just an example in how we involve the families, the communities, neighborhoods, teachers, trainers, philanthropy workers, social workers, as well as children in the process of holistic development of our young individuals. So that will conclude my short presentation. In conclusion, I would say that beyond the pandemic, some of the fundamental changes of education will be sustained, and we better, develop our ways to adapt and also to lead those changes. I think number one is the inclusivity of all community stakeholders. Secondly is the integration of subjects, not just math or Chinese or art or physical education, but rather integration of content and subjects. And thirdly, it's about the holistic human development of our children instead of just learning certain skill sets. So that concludes my short presentation. Tavares.
Yang Lan, thank you very much for being with us. I also want to welcome you to a virtual WISE, but I want to say that I do look forward to welcoming you to an actual in-person WISE before too long. I have to say that video really moved me, because not only do you demonstrate the power of art, in allowing children to, express their emotions, but I think, and this is something that's been troubling me about this pandemic, is the concern that one of the negative outcomes might be that we all withdraw into our own little, national or parochial shells. But I think, those images and the voiceover, it speaks not just to the experience of a few hundred children in China. I want to believe that it speaks to the experience of billions around the world. So I want to get your permission for us to have this video on the WISE channel and make it available to all our community.
Thank you. It's an honor.
I mean, it's just incredible. Let me ask you. You are a media personality. That's you were introduced to me before we met as the Oprah Winfrey of China, which but maybe Oprah Winfrey should be the Yang Lan of America. I don't know which way this should go. But can you say something about how media can help accelerate the social impact of education and also facilitate this learning outside of the classroom, which your foundation so ably does?
Well, definitely. I think I can leverage on my media experiences to amplify the impact of these important messages for the unity and for the sustainability of our society through the powerful path of storytelling. I think my role in this is just serving as a bridge. I think the media's essence is about connectivity between people and also between people and information. But our ultimate goal is to mobilize and initiate actual changes for a better society, for the improvement of our civilization. So I think my media experiences in storytelling is helping me, first of all, to tell the stories of these children who are mostly unheard or invisible to a bigger public, so that there's a bigger public awareness of how the livelihood is like, and how the challenges and how the dreams are changing our children's mindsets. And also, secondly, it's about storytelling between people, among the families, among the neighborhood, among the stakeholders of these children's immediate society. By involving schools and teachers, social workers, parents, neighbors, I think these children feel more connected. When I started our nonprofit organization 7 years ago, we have noticed that although these children are poor mostly, but what they need most is emotional support instead of only material support. When they move into big cities with their migrant worker parents, they feel lonely because they're cut away from their familiar neighborhood, from their friends, from the people they know. They feel humbled and sometimes unconfident about themselves. So I think through art and through innovative education, when we get these stories out of these kids, they feel connected, they feel accepted, and so their self-esteem is boomed. So I think, yes, we do need media, both traditional media and social media, online media and offline media, to reconnect with each other. And that's a very powerful way to enable our young individuals.
Yeah, no, again, I mean, just incredible. And if I can ask you so when these kids see, their stories, in the form of works of art, when they see them displayed, when they see them as postcards, and then they see them in the hands of, in this case, the incredible frontline healthcare workers. What are you seeing in terms of their response and their growth as individuals?
Well, through the years, that's something I care about the most. I want to see the proof of actual change instead of just our good heart or our one-sided interest or wish. Throughout the years, we have hired professional academia, professional teams to evaluate independently of the result or the impact of this program upon children. And we can see the self-esteem is hugely enhanced because they feel heard, they feel connected, they feel accepted and respected and appreciated. We have children exhibiting their art pieces in the national galleries and national museums, and they brought their parents who are, delivery men or construction workers to those exhibitions, and you can see the pride in their parents' eyes. And accordingly, you see the huge boom of confidence of these children. But I think it's not just the acceptance of the mainstream or of those people in power or those who have more voices in the society, but also the sense of being confident as the person you are. I think that's very important. One of our former project is to ask these children to bring back a glass bottle of earth from their hometown, from their root. And we exhibited with the help of contemporary artists as blocks and squares of those earth demonstrated together. And the full spectrum of colors of earth, and we call it colorful earth. And that's the sense of rooting. That's the sense of identity, to make the kids to be confident enough to be who they are instead of just who they want to intermingle with, you know. I think that's very important because that will give them a foundation to be themselves in a very complicated and challenging environment.
Yeah, I have one final question that really follows from your comments, and it's something that we've heard throughout these last couple of days, and even actually going back to the first convening we had virtually in April, that really what seems to be of greatest value, particularly in these difficult circumstances, is really social and emotional learning and well-being. And that is by no means part of the mainstream of education. So, and a lot of what you're doing, using the power of art, again, it's incredible, is really you're facilitating the social and emotional growth of these kids. So my question is, how can we scale that? How can we create more space for this in our mainstream education systems?
Well, I can't agree with you more. I think the purpose is to help to grow holistic development of these children instead of just learning certain skills of painting or music or singing or dancing or writing. So social and emotional intelligence and capacity is the main goal of our innovative educational services to the communities. I think the key to that is to involve different stakeholders from the society. In the past, we have art teachers who are only teaching kids how to draw, and we have emotional or ethical teachers who are teaching those the moral guidelines to children, but they don't really integrate each other together to innovate the way of teaching. So we took a lot of time in training the teachers to teach in different ways, and also to engage parents and students in different ways, as well as social workers from communities. For example, one of our previous topic is about what children are afraid of the most. You know, we're talking about fear. Very sensitive topic. So the kids, they draw pictures of watching their parents fighting each other, or facing poverty, or facing the difficulty of life. And we show these paintings to their parents, and the response was enormous because adults don't realize that children are watching us so closely. So suddenly they have built up this awareness of responding to their own children's emotions and observations. Yeah. So I think by involving cross-sectional stakeholders into this kind of programs, we can scale up and we can also benefit more.
Yang Lan, thank you for demonstrating the power of art, not only as a tool of storytelling, but also as a tool of education, a tool that can help promote social and emotional learning. There's so much in your keynote and our exchange that I don't think I'm going to do it justice if I try to summarize it. I really want to thank you for being part of WISE. We've run a little over time, but I think it was well worth it. And I really look forward to welcoming you to a future WISE Summit in person. Thank you.
I look forward to that. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. What a fresh and inspirational way to start the day. I don't know if we can have a better combination of arts, but also arts made by kids and arts made by kids in difficult circumstances. It's just a great work, and we do look forward to continue this collaboration with Mrs. Yang Lan and really have her in the WISE Summit, hopefully soon. I am moving to the next segment. As you know, it's a privilege to be working with WISE because we develop great partnerships and we develop great friends through these partnerships. And through this partnership, we grow the objective of learning a certain topics. Last summit, we co-organized with the next partner that I'm going to introduce, a very successful EdTech investor track. We brought together, and really a great effort from the team that I'm going to introduce, over 40 EdTech investors from around the world to look at past and future, investment trends and what are the opportunities for this big pillars of education. I'm very happy to introduce that we are doing the next session in partnership with Holland IQ. And for the morning session, we will have Maria Spies, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Holland IQ, going through this amazing panel of what does the EdTech landscape look like post-COVID-19. Maria, please, the stage is yours.
Hi there. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. We love partnering with WISE, and of course, this session as well with the Salzburg Global Seminar for the WISE Summit. It's a fantastic event. I can see over 400 people tuning in, and that last presentation was amazing. And what it made me think of was there are so many perspectives that are bringing to bear their experiences and their insights about one common thing that's happening all around the world. Of course, that's COVID-19. And so from the perspective of this presentation, we're coming at it from a different viewpoint. What we're looking at here is the way in which EdTech, the way in which technology is being used, the way it's being used in learning, the way in which it's being used to support educators and schools and universities, and zooming back out a little bit, thinking about opportunities for EdTech to perhaps play a greater role going forward in education. So I'm really very, very pleased and honoured to be moderating this panel with our speakers. Firstly, let me introduce our speakers. Ben Wers. Ben, perhaps you could, oh, there you are. Hi, Ben. Ben is tuning in from Paris, France. Ben is a partner at Bright Eye Venture Capital, and Bright Eye Venture Capital is an EdTech-focused fund. And, Ben has been in EdTech investment for a very long time in the US, the UK, and of course, Europe. And Bright Eye is one of the leading EdTech venture capital funds. So he knows what's really going on in the early stages, in particular, of EdTech. Secondly, Smita Dura. Smita, if you could turn on. Hey, hi there, Smita. Smita is joining us from India. And Smita is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Lead School. Lead School is now, I think, supporting 300,000 students across 800 schools. That's an amazing feat, and has become one of the largest online schools in India, and in particular, of course, in this COVID situation. Smita has worked with governments, implemented preschool in a box to reduce dropouts and low attainment in schools, spent years working in sort of finance and strategy, treasury in different parts of the world. So an amazing background and experience there. And finally, Mikkel Marfelt. Mikkel, if you could turn on your, hi Mikkel, how are you? Mikkel is joining us from Copenhagen, if I'm correct. Yes, so we're from all around the world today, like our audience. And Mikkel is the Director of Investor Relations and New Strategic Initiatives for Labster. And Labster is a science education company developing advanced training simulations for companies and institutions. It's a very, very interesting model. I know that Mikkel will talk a little bit more about that later. Mikkel has both studied at and taught at universities in the US and Europe and Asia, China in particular. And recently, Mikkel also has been an advisor to the Danish Minister for Education on how to adopt new technologies throughout the education sector in the country. And so this is a fantastic panel. Let me just share my screen now so I can jump straight into sharing the presentation.
Oh no, we lost Maria.
I'm pretty sure she will return. Maybe in the meantime we can have a little word from each one, and I will be a gentleman and start with Mita. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening these days and how have been the experience with the lockdown?
Yeah, I think it's been now over 3 months of schools being shut here in India. And I think one of the big challenges we face here in India is just access to technology. So what COVID has done has clearly shown us that technology adoption has to be really fast and rapid across the country, and we need to do whatever it takes for us to get these devices and access to our students. So I think what we were as an edtech company were looking at doing over the next 2 years, we've pretty much had to sort of shrink all of that and do that in the last 2 or 3 months. I think it's a great opportunity. At the same time, it's been challenging. So yeah, Maria, back to you. I was filling in for you.
Maria, I took your role for a little minute while we know we found you back. Thank you for joining us, and I leave it for you now.
I apologize. Everything just went blank. I dropped out. Back again now, so everyone can see the screen that I have open. That's wonderful. So let me just jump to the next screen. We have a fairly packed agenda this morning. The session will cover around there are 4 sections to the session. Section number 1, I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of global analysis of EdTech innovation and funding. This is just to set the stage, really. I'll be super quick. I'm going to just have a look at what's happening, zooming right out to 60,000 feet, what's happening around the world. And then, audience, we're going to have a poll. I would love for you to get engaged in this presentation. There's a poll where we want your opinions on things. And depending on how you respond, we might be able to focus on certain things in the rest of our presentation. So we're going to have 3 polls for each of the sessions. I'll do the introduction, and then we're going to address a question which is really, COVID-19, as you know, has accelerated the use of technology all across education and many other sectors, but education in particular. And I really, we want to sort of explore which technologies our panel members think are thriving, where things are really needed, and where are the gaps yet to be addressed. So that's section number two. Section number 3 is around, COVID-19 providing huge challenges for all sorts of parts of education, but also significant opportunities. Is this the opportunity for making changes? And I'd really love to know from the panel members' perspective, from their part of the world and their part of the sector, what are their thoughts on the longer term impact of how COVID may change elements of the world's education delivery in greater ways? Is this the beginning of something new, really new, or are we heading just on an accelerated path? So, and then we'll have time for Q&A, just a few question and answer from the audience. So let's sort of jump through into the first part. We've already introduced everybody. Let's move to a global analysis of EdTech innovation and funding. So firstly, I wanted to jump back to March this year, when Holland IQ did a global survey of people in education. So they could be working in institutions like leaders of universities and schools and teachers, those who are founding edtech organizations, those who service education, could be publishers or tech companies or whatever, and also investors, those who are investing in education. And we asked that global group of people what they thought the impact, short-term and long-term, would be on of COVID would be on their organization. And so this is a sort of a sample of those results. You can see in the short term, which is the left-hand side there, most institutions were very concerned about thinking that COVID-19 would have in the short term, that their institution, their organization would be substantially or moderately worse off. EdTech didn't feel that concerned as institutions, of course, and you can see their services and investors, still people very, very concerned. This was the early days. This was in March. And however, a lot more confident about the long-term impact. You can see there that the vast majority of investors and services and EdTech felt actually that in the long term everything would be okay, and in fact perhaps this was an opportunity for change for the better. Institutions still quite concerned about the long-term impact. We will be running this survey again in September, and let's have a look at how people react, not post-COVID, because who knows how long it's going to last, but certainly after, they're not necessarily in the shock time anymore. We also, we also did ask organisations around, by organisation type. You can see there, and about the short and long-term impact. Let me move to the next slide. We wondered about. Were there any differences here geographically? And so again, Africa, Oceania, which is mainly Australia, Asia, Europe, still it's fairly even, but those countries with rather large international education seem to be much more concerned, because that model relies, of course, on people travelling. That's in the long term. Let me move straight through. We also asked these organisations about when they expect disruption to education, like real disruption. And, you can see here by sector, in terms of half of them did expect a disruption to their part of the sector within 2 years. And earlier surveys that we ran, that was still more years away. So I think people were thinking that COVID was definitely a point at which education may accelerate some sort of disruption, but they didn't really know what that might be yet. One of the things to think about in terms of education, which most people, vast majority of people, when they think about education, don't think of it as a market. It's actually very big. And so between schools, between governments and companies and individuals and parents, about $6 trillion or a bit more now is spent on education every year. But by 2025, that's going to be growing to, 8 trillion, and we estimate 10 trillion by 2030. You can see there in the donut shapes, though, that there's a little bit of a change in the way that spending might move from 2018 to 25 and then into 2030. And so mainly, really, we're seeing a shrinking of spending on post-formal, bundled post-secondary education, and a growth in what you might call corporate training. And that is more the ongoing upskilling, not necessarily accredited education. And really, I think, this is very positive. We see a growth in spending on pre-K education, and I think that's a fantastic sign. So this is a big market. It is changing slightly. The other thing about education is that it's a very, very small digital spend. Over the whole spending in education, only less than 3% is spent on digital. Of course, teachers, salaries, physical presence, etc., is a major part of the spending, but still digital is very small. And we do expect that to grow. And I wonder how much this chart was done prior to COVID. And it'll be interesting to see when we do this exercise again, perhaps in a year or so, the change in that spending of digital. In terms of EdTech itself, you can see here EdTech venture capital investment. So EdTech being technologies that support learning, technologies that support schools, that support teachers, that support direct learning, or those who are delivering learning. It's all those sorts of investment. And you can see the graph. I mean, if you just sort of zoom out and have a look at the shape of that graph, there's a massive amount of increased spending or investment in EdTech over the since 2012, since 2013 really, and that last part is Q1 of 2020. Q2 is pretty much the same as Q1, and so we don't see a slowdown in people, individuals, investors, private capital, essentially putting money into education through this period. And moving on to the next slide really talks about where is this money being spent in education? Who is investing in what? And when we took a snapshot of half a year last year's venture capital investment, you can see there that a big chunk of it is being spent in the area of talent and work, and that is those ongoing training, those sorts of upskilling. And if you recall me saying that we're seeing a shift from spending in post-secondary and corporate training, this is sort of backs that up as well. There's a lot more investment. There's a lot of investment going into the talent, work, skills, upskilling, etc. part of education. But still, again, you see STEM, coding and robotics, AR and VR, content and resources, test prep and tutoring. So people are investing across that whole life cycle. And a little bit, just to finish off, just a little bit about what sort of trends we're seeing here in terms of investment in each of those areas and models in each of those areas. So financing education is an interesting part of the value chain. And what we're seeing there is companies being formed to microfinance solutions for students. This is not necessarily financing their tuition, but it's financing a laptop or textbooks or other things to do with financing their education. And you know, in the skills and jobs area, we're seeing new models that are starting to integrate education and upskilling and talent and skills. In terms of companies these days are, you know, it's a bit of a talent war. So companies these days are working with organizations on skills mapping the skills of their whole workforce and then identifying what are the gaps and then upskilling. Rather than moving and getting, you know, new skills in, they're upskilling their workforce. So this is a great thing. And we're seeing we've seen quite a few analytics and workforce skills mapping type organizations, you know, arising. Language learning is interesting as well, of course. Many more peer-to-peer models. Voice technology is becoming very big. Chatbot learning and so on. There's a fair bit of activity in that space. In the B2C area, this is education, edtech companies supporting learners directly rather than, you know, through schools or universities. And so what we're seeing there is some these sort of models are starting to look a little bit more like consumer tech. They're big numbers, millions and millions of students, peer-to-peer Q&A platforms, on-demand, mobile first, help me with a question, help me with my homework, etc. Building up lots and lots of data. So there's that sort of trend as well. And in the higher education space, we're seeing a lot more, we're seeing a growth in public-private partnerships embedding skills verification models inside degree programs. And I think that sort of partnership between private tech-led models and traditional, in this case, higher education, is an interesting trend in terms of edtech investment. So I'm going to stop there in terms of my part of the presentation, because really what we want to get to is our expert panel for them to share their expertise. Let me move to the first poll. Excuse me. So if the tech team could get the first poll going.
People don't think much of private capital funding.
Okay. So the question is, which of the following do you think will have the greatest impact on education innovation? And what we're seeing here is that, you know, a good chunk of people, a third of people nearly, are thinking and supportive of universities and schools and institutions leading the innovation, which is wonderful. We want our education experts to lead innovation in education, of course, and governments definitely. That's wonderful. So we're seeing really equal sort of confidence in the existing system. Universities and schools, government policy, government action. We are seeing that around the world. And I like the idea of public-private partnerships supporting new models where you partner with the best of both worlds in a way. Interesting, only a small number of people are thinking that private capital funding innovation will sort of have the greatest impact. Fantastic. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so let's jump into our very first question. Really, it's around which technologies and tools are thriving, which are really growing, which are being, what trends are you seeing in the market in terms of edtech, and what's needed and where are the gaps and what are the things yet to be addressed? I might, Ben, I might start off with you. If you could give us your thoughts on that.
Sure. So I'm realizing that this actually focuses more on the trends that we're seeing by kind of consumers or by user sector rather than by technology. But this is kind of what we're seeing generally speaking. We can dive more into technologies in the Q&A if you'd like. But generally speaking, the first thing that happened during COVID, you know, you had 90% of the world's school and university students affected, which is over 1.5 billion students. You know, not quite sequentially, but at least in my mind, what happened was first parents got online to see what tools they could afford their kids. And broadly speaking, you saw 90% increase between Q4 and sort of end of Q1 in educational apps writ large, with platforms that were already at scale seeing 2 to 3x growth. So things like VIP Kids, which is a tutoring platform mainly in English language tutoring platform mainly in China. Epic, which is an online library for kids mainly in the US. And Brainly, which is more of a global tool for students across the world. Those platforms saw tremendous amounts of growth. They were already very large platforms to begin with, and because they were at scale and had already built awareness, I think they really saw a huge uptick in usage. The sort of second thing that happened, maybe not quite sequentially, but in my mind, was that schools began to do a massive amount of experimentation and implementation of distance learning platforms. This is, you know, universities, obviously, in the spring break in the U.S., a lot of universities all universities shut down in terms of their physical campuses and began to heavily implement distance learning platforms. And so things like Google Classroom and Canvas, which are learning management, various implementations of learning management systems, Alla, which is a sort of a next generation learning management system. All of those tools began to see a big increase in usage, at first from existing customers. So a lot of universities had already been using these platforms and just implemented them on a much bigger scale, and then eventually attracting new users as well. And then, adults for their own account. When you think about, if you were already looking to learn English or French or Chinese, and as an adult, or if you were already looking to learn coding or more innovation economy skills, people went out and sought the platforms that were online as opposed to looking for physical, bricks and mortar schools. And so again, platforms that had a certain amount of scale saw massive, 2 to 3x increases in a relatively short period of time. There are a couple listed here on the slide. I think, what we see, and we can talk about this I guess the second question is longer term. I think that it's hard to see K-12 being or K-12 primary and secondary schools going virtual over the long term at scale, because there's just too much infrastructure, and honestly, part of the function that they serve is safeguarding kids during the day as well as educating them, and so that's much harder in a virtual context. But it is easier to see adult and higher education learning becoming more virtual, and so I think the longer term impact will be in that sphere, and we'll talk about it more I guess later. But that's kind of what we see happening today.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely in terms of the sort of prevailing wisdom is that K-12 might go back a little bit more to what it was, whereas higher education, post-secondary and sort of ongoing upskilling may actually change forever. Smita, I'm really interested in your take on that. Given your part in the ecosystem and having all those hundreds of thousands of kids pretty much online, maybe you could give us your view on the current situation and how that might lead into the future.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Ben. So yeah, I think I'll just focus on the K-12 space. I mean, we have close to 1.3 billion school-going children in the world, and more than 50% of them are going in developing countries. It's almost 300 million just in India alone. And if I look at with COVID, what are the two? Learning is getting really, really impacted by two large vectors. I think one of them is access to technology. And access in the pre-COVID world was access to a physical school, and that's shifted dramatically. So it's access to technology, and then the quality of the teacher. So teachers' ability to be able to teach effectively and make the learning happen online, at a distance. Now, if I look at these two vectors, I would really, I could summarize what we're seeing happen in the Indian market, right? So in India, we see there are those students who have high access to technology and high access, high teacher quality from the schools that they've been going to. That's a very small number. And over there, learning has pretty much been seamless. So these physical learning environments have moved online. The collaboration has been there online, and they're using these collaborative tools like Zoom and Google Classroom and similar technologies. And it's been fairly seamless for these students. The second bucket, I would say, is those who have access, high access to technology, but they are in towns or in places in India where teacher quality isn't as good. And in those segments, what we've seen is that supplemental learning programs and apps have become a very big part of the solution. And a bit of homeschooling, and this is where we see in India, particularly in the last few years, we've had some really successful edtech solutions which have seen rapid adoption in the last few months. People like or organizations like Baiju and Vedantu, Topper, Unacademy, they'll end up serving this segment where there is already access to technology. As you would see the numbers, we are still talking fairly small numbers when we look at the total student population, school-going student population in India. The third, I would say, is those who don't have access to good technology, but in pockets have access to good teachers, where teacher quality is high. There we've seen some very interesting hacks, in the last 2 months. Basically, lessons happening through videos over WhatsApp, YouTube, teachers creating these sessions, and basically exchanging messages with students and doing small group WhatsApp sessions to still keep the learning going. Again, in the larger context of India, I would say it's a small number. The largest number really of students is in the low access to technology and low teacher quality segment. And that's where there continues to be a gap. That's where lead schools work is. And if I have to sort of summarize some of our learnings over the last 2 to 3 months, where we went from being content and technology providers to schools, we actually in March moved to being school online. For these physical schools, we became the online school. And here essentially I would say that there are three things that seem to work, or will provide more access here. One is basically for us as companies to create solutions that learning solutions that work on a smartphone. Given that phone penetration in this target segment is very, very high, they do not have access to laptops or tablets. It's not as affordable for them. So I think smartphone solutions is one thing to look at. The other is that internet connection in this segment is not very easily available. The infrastructure does not exist, but because there are smartphones, mobile data packs are there. So how do you deliver the learning experience using those data pipes? And the third big part really is on how do you really work with the fact that teacher quality is low. So just providing the technology interface to the teacher is not going to help move the learning forward. So here, the class in class, or like a master teacher, support teacher approach seems to work and give us good learning outcomes. What that really means is that there are these pre-recorded videos with master teachers who are really doing the 1:many sort of teaching, which the school teacher uses as a facilitator, and then basically closes the learning loop by ensuring that there is completion by students, there is doubt resolution, assessments are happening, remedials are being done, and all of that getting seamlessly provided on a common platform, which is very, very then simple for her to use through her own phone. So this is the place where we've seen rapid innovation. I mean, we've led a large part of it ourselves, but this is both an area of gap, I would say, where a lot of innovation is needed. So it's a huge opportunity, and it's also a place where we've been able to do some work and have some learnings.
That's really, really interesting. I think what you've hit on there is something very important, which is it's obviously not just about the technology, but the way in which when you have to redesign all parts of a system in order to move it forward, and technology can help redesign parts of that system. But actually, you've talked about a different teacher roles, for example, that didn't perhaps exist before, didn't need to, and different levels of support for students and so on like that. So it's sort of reimagining the way in which a whole system of education and support for children and children's learning could unfold. And I guess that's why, or perhaps that explains some of the audience's poll responses, because governments are responsible to and should be thinking about reimagining those systems in order for access and outcomes. Mikkel, on your side, what's happened here is that I'm looking at the polls because they're just open there on the side, and I can see that like nearly 60% of all our respondents in the audience think that actually virtual and augmented reality, those types of technologies would make the most positive impact in education in the long term. And I know, that Labster works in that whole field, and you've also been working with institutions and organizations to some extent to redesign that system we were talking about, more than just chuck a technology in and use it in the same way, slot it into the same way you always did it. So what are your comments on, let me jump through to your slide there. What are your comments on that, the poll results, first of all, and just linking in with Smita's comments?
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks for inviting me, and good to see you both, Maria, Smita, and Ben, and the rest of the audience. It's very much a pleasure. And I'm happy to see the poll results, given we are in a space of providing virtual simulations to students across the world. So maybe I should just give a little bit of a context of who we are. Labster is a science education company that basically works through the philosophy that has been working for, I guess, 40 years now, of flight simulators, where you train pilots to fly expensive planes. We just don't do planes and flight simulators. We do simulators in all types of science experiments and lab practicals, and simulate science equipment so students can access it. And I think probably from the context of coming from a K-12 perspective that Smita presented, we, it should be noted, are more focused on higher education as our main market. We do also deliver to high schools, but higher education is our main focus. And I think in terms of sort of thinking of where are gaps filled, I can say from our side of the pond that it seems that we are filling a gap in these COVID times. I want to take you through 3 results that we've been tracking along the COVID period. And prior to that, we were, as a relatively high growth edtech company, and post this during this pandemic, we've become a very high growth company. I'll dive a little bit more into why that is, but very shortly, if you look at the middle square on the 90%, it says why we've been serving educators who started using us as part of the COVID situation. And these are teachers in many cases that have not had experience with virtualization. They've never even thought about training students in a virtual simulation instead of taking them to a next generation sequencing machine or a particle accelerator. They've never had sort of the idea of why shouldn't we just enable the students to do this virtually instead. And the respondents have been very positive. 90% of educators actually see this as a positive experience. And this is during COVID. If you look at the right side, the orange square, this dives into, so what do these educators actually think post the pandemic? Will this be valuable post the pandemic? And there's a clear indication from 91% that this is something that they can relate to and would be willing to use in in-person classes when things get back to normal. So that in itself points to the COVID has pushed on a tendency or a change or transition in the mindset of educators, but the educators does not see this as a one-time thing. And if you look at the left side of the screen, the green square, this is really, it's difficult to see here, at least on my small screen, but this is a massive survey. It's 625,000 students that we've been surveying. And we've basically been asked, what do they think of Labster? And in this case, 85% of them come out as pleased. And this is quite significant. This also tells something about what we have seen before, is that students also drive this change significantly. At the same time, these students haven't had the same, power to move education changes, and this power has then been shifted a bit through COVID.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think you've also you picked up on the same theme that Smita talked about, which is the importance of teachers here. I mean, you do see a lot of edtech moving down the B2C route because they want all the numbers, right? Because you can sell directly to the learner. But actually, real innovation and change, if it's going to happen across the whole of the education system, you've got to get to those teachers. And I wonder, Ben, very quickly, because we need to get on to the last question, but have you seen lots of movement in that space? I mean, those edtech companies that are, have you seen those ones that are successful focusing on supporting not only the student and their learning or whatever environment, but also building in professional development and support and so on for teachers?
Yeah, I mean, actually, so this company in our portfolio called Ala, which is, as I mentioned briefly, it's a sort of next generation learning management system for universities. And what they've done actually, partially in response to COVID, is they've sort of built in learning design expertise consulting services into on the front end of the platform. And what they're doing is not just offering the ability for universities to have more engaged students, increase the level of interaction between students and teachers and students, but also on the front end, providing teachers with design services on bringing the courses that they used to be delivering offline or potentially in a very static format online into a more dynamic format. And because they have a technology platform underneath that, it's really a very powerful combination, right? And they've seen a tremendous amount of uptake on that. And so yeah, the short answer is yes. That's one specific example, but I think you'll see a lot more of that as you know, platforms look to supplement. Yeah, as everybody's been saying, just putting a technology, you know, out there in the world and then expecting magic to happen is not a good recipe for anything. You really, particularly in the context of institutional learning, you need a combination of motivation on the part of teachers, motivation on the part of the administration, honestly, and motivation on the part of students. And so some combination of training and technology is usually a better solution than just technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that the third poll has come up now, which is very interesting. And it really it's saying that the audience is thinking that COVID actually is the spark for systematic change across the whole of the education system. It'll never be the same again, which is, you know, very, very interesting response. And that even cements even further the importance of if you're in the education technology space or you're in ed tech, then you do you do need to support that whole sort of set of stakeholders, not just the learner or the administrator or the teacher, but actually the whole lot, because you know, that whole system will be involved in using your technology. And so that brings us to, I guess, the last sort of question, which is, what are our perspectives on the longer term impact of how COVID may change elements of the world's education delivery? We've heard it from the audience. They think that actually this is it'll never be the same again. So what are your perspectives on that? I think, Smita, I'm going to start with you. Let me just jump to the next one. You've got this very interesting slide about sort of before and after, I guess. I'm interested in you explaining that.
So I think, you know, if I'll bring the perspective of schools here. And, you know, if you look at the B2C EdTech solutions, they are predominantly supplementary learning for students. Core learning is still anchored at school. And, you know, as we discussed earlier, schools are really going to be important, as Ben mentioned, because children will, you know, it's also about care. It's also about community. Now, in India, and I'm sure in a lot of the developing countries, basically technology, schools have not been using technology as much in the past, and there has been resistance, you know, or there has been slow trial. I think this has dramatically shifted during the, you know, over the last 2 months, and there has been rapid trial by all stakeholders in the school, you know, and I've put all the stakeholders there. There's also been, you know, very, very rapid trial and adoption in the last 2 months. And the user inertia actually does not, you know, no longer exists. We had a time when school owners and principals only wanted to do face-to-face teacher training sessions, and, you know, wanted us to be there physically, but now they've all opened up to virtual meets. So it's very clear. And, you know, in addition, I would say it's very clear that in the next 9 to 12 months, schools will not go back to working the way they used to work in the previous you know, very physical analog world. So the old the pre-COVID way a school would run would be you know, all these different stakeholders in the student's life, I would say, or all of those who are working for the student's learning are sort of working in a disintegrated manner, and in a lot of instances working in silos. What we see shifting, and, you know, that's something that Lead School has been trying to do. It's gotten accelerated with COVID, is basically, you know, ensuring that learning happens in a sequence, whether it is happening in school or at home, seamlessly through integrated tech systems, so that whether I need to be in school today because I'm in a green zone, or in India we have green and yellow, green and amber and red zones, in terms of whether you are in a hotspot or whether you're in a safe place where schools might start for a few days, but I will need to go back home and do some of my sessions from home. So this whole physical digital hybrid solution is what's going to help schools survive, and it's also what's going to help schools deliver seamless learning to students. And I think the beauty of all this is, and which is why I show the circle, I think it's actually very beneficial for students, because now is a real chance for us to personalize learning, for us to really bring multimodal delivery systems to school, to students, which is not only textbook based, but textbook or digital or interactive, all seamlessly happening because all the stakeholders are on a common platform. So I think that's the shift we see in core school learning, and schools still deliver the largest chunk of the learning outcome. So I would say that's a pretty big shift with COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right in that it's not like we're all going online for a while and then we'll all just immediately go back. It could go for a very, very long time, and people get used to that, and things are redesigned around that sort of hybrid model, essentially, the online merging with offline. Yeah, absolutely. Mikkel, let me ask you to have your sort of say on where you think the longer term impact may well be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm taking the liberty to post some of the data that you know quite well, Maria. This is it's just me trying to sort of at least situate where we see the change happening in our small part of the larger industry, the virtualization of science experiments. And I would almost go to the point of saying that the trajectory or the growth that you project towards 2025, we will see already within this year in this small area. So if you jump to the next slide, one thing that I think is valuable to mention here, and probably to state more generally, is that this pandemic has created a situation where universities, higher ed institutions, who are often those that have the expensive science equipment, are caught in an even bigger problem than they were before, in the sense that previously they had to buy this expensive equipment and had to get as many students through as possible to gain the value of that those science facilities. Now they have the science facilities, but they cannot get these students through. And if they get them through, it's going to be in smaller groups. They don't know if new waves come in. So suddenly you have an idle, extremely expensive equipment. And that means that there's a very unfavorable business case for having science facilities. And that's a major problem, because scientists need to have access to these facilities and need to learn the practicals. But virtualizations can come in here and do a big lift. And just to emphasize, this is not only the learning outcomes, but the students get more engaged. And what you see here on this slide is just a recent study done on Cal State Northridge in California, where teachers have been looking at what are the dropout rates after our simulations have been implemented. And they had a 20% dropout rate. That fell down to 5%. That means that these students go through, they graduate, they pay tuition fees for the next year, and so on. There's a massive business case for not only considering the supplementing the science facilities, but even replacing some of the science facilities with virtual experiments, if it both ensures that they don't have to spend excessive amounts of money on physical facilities, but also see increased passing rates.
I think one of the things, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to conclude on that and say that I think some of the biggest changes that I see coming is actually also on the political level. I'm having conversations with politicians and ministers across the world. I can give you an example of a country that we are working with now. They have been testing Labster throughout the last 2 months, a ministry, and comparing to the other ministries we've worked with pre-COVID, the adoption rate throughout the population in this country has been 24 times faster. So there's a massive adoption, especially if it comes from a political level, and that will cascade down to leaderships and also to budget changes.
We certainly have seen governments rethinking their role in terms of funding, broadening their horizon in terms of what could be funded or should be funded. And the other thing that you talked about that you reminded me of before we jump into Ben's thoughts to round out the presentation is that these sort of tools, and the audience agrees with you in terms of VR and AR, I guess, they move you from a scarcity mindset. There's one lab and you have to book it in and you can only go in once a week or once a month or something. It's a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. You can practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. There is no end to practice because it's in a virtual environment. And so I think it changes the way people think potentially about those things, because we're still sitting in a scarcity mindset, a scarce teacher, a scarce classroom, a scarce set of, computer or whatever. So I think that's a really great point.
And maybe just as a last comment, one nuance to the poll that I think is relevant to take in is we think of ourselves also as a VR company, but not as a VR with goggles company. We provide the simulations through laptops. And there's a very, very, very important distinction between these, because right now during pandemics, VR goggles is not an optimal situation. Both as if you are sharing this between students, then you're passing on corona if you have it. At the same time, it's expensive hardware, but everyone has laptops. So in that sense, that part of virtualization is here to stay.
It's interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Ben, I want to round out with you. You've got a really interesting sort of zoomed out view here on the slide about what's next.
Yeah. So, and this actually, and I'm realizing now, is actually partially an answer to your first question. So let me just go through this real quickly. But the idea is, when I look at the very quick history of EdTech, there were sort of successive waves of in EdTech, which were taking advantage of different broader technological advances. So the first wave of EdTech that I was aware of anyway was really the idea of, hey, we're going to take software and we're going to make the administration of educational institutions better, faster, cheaper. And that's things like Blackboard, which was one of the first EdTech companies to do an IPO in the US, and is a learning management system for universities. And it was really just taking a lot of the back end stuff and putting it into software, and making the administration of universities easier. And that was taking advantage of just the advance of software. Then, in the 2000s, you saw the internet really come along and come of age. And the idea, I think, initially was like, hey, let's take courses and put them on the internet and magic will happen. I think it took a while for the business models to come behind that. But you had companies like 2U and Coursera, which were essentially taking a lot of the knowledge that was happening in universities and making it more broadly available. And then just by virtue of the fact that the internet existed and you could distribute, and increasingly there were more and more laptops in people's hands. And then, I think that there's another wave that happened as mobile and video and became more present. Broadband penetration increased both in schools and in homes, and you had the possibility to not just distribute learning, but really engage people within educational experiences that were more digitally native. So platforms like Kahoot, which is a Norwegian company that allows you to do more dynamic quizzes in real time, and both in a K-12 environment, but also in a corporate environment. Platforms like VIP Kid, which I talked about before, which is kind of live online tutoring, online language tutoring for kids. And then, and that really started about 10 years ago. And then more recently, with the advent of AI, you had platforms like Lulushao in China, Photomath in Europe, are essentially taking advantage of artificial intelligence to drive learning in a variety of ways. So Lulushao is around language learning, Photomath is around math learning, but the idea is more instant feedback and improvement around using AI and machine learning to really drive questions and answers in a more dynamic and personalized format, right? So that's kind of the evolution that we've seen today. And I will say because, as you mentioned at the beginning, digital penetration has been really low in education to date. You've been able to basically ride these, and if you were at the forefront of implementing each of these technologies, you could build a fairly big company, but across a fairly narrow base, honestly, in education, because penetration was relatively low. And so now, I think the good news for everybody is that and Mikko and is living this to some extent. You have a much bigger base and you have much bigger adoption, a much broader adoption. People are increasingly looking to digital as a way to as the place to learn. The bad news is that, or I guess the bad news from a business perspective is you're just going to see companies aggregating all these technologies together and go more across. So it's not just going to be about hey, this is a mobile, like in the case of Kahoot, this is a mobile engaging experience. They're going to look to incorporate things like distribution, things like administration. So you're going to look to, as in the example of all that I gave before, you're going to go from just an engagement platform to more of a full stack platform. And these companies, which were fairly siloed, are going to start competing with each other more across these technologies. So that was the idea of the slide. I'm not sure how clear that was, but my sense is there's this massive opportunity, which is great. What we're seeing is that already in countries where COVID has sort of subsided, the growth rate post-COVID is much higher than the growth rate pre-COVID. It's not quite as high as it was in the middle of the pandemic, but you're seeing what we expected, which is a higher growth rate post-COVID than you saw in at the beginning of Q1. But then you're just going to have more competition across verticals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the audience said it in that we can't predict what the future will be, but we do know, and what we all agree on, that there are some fundamental changes occurring now, not just on the surface changes, but fundamental changes due to this sort of spark of COVID. And so, panel, thank you so much. I really appreciate your expertise, and I know that the audience did as well. And audience, apologies, we don't have time for questions, but we got a lot of fantastic conversation in today. And thank you again, Wise.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for everyone. Thanks, Mita, Mikael. It was very interesting. I think everyone agreed that about the fact that COVID has sparked, a systematic change. But what was very interesting in my view is the fact we could have seen, the numbers, the trends, the sectors, what is affected, and how EdTech will come and play a role. Let me share with you a little funny story, because I'm receiving notes from my colleague, and we only have now 5 minutes break before getting into the next session. So please stay on your chair and stretch, and we'll see you in about 5. Actually, not even. We have to start right away. In a minute, the next session, which is a session that we always did at the WISE Summit, and it's called "Hear My Story." We try to gather inspirational stories, original stories from people working in different sector within our community. And this session will be led by my colleague, Aurelio Amaral, who is a policy officer. Aurelio has just joined us. Hello, Aurelio. Aurelio, I'll leave it for you to take the audience to hear stories from speakers working in different sectors in education. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias. Thank you, everyone who is watching us right now. After this very comprehensive overview on the EdTech landscape in the previous panel moderated by Maria Spice, thank you, Maria, again. We're going to learn now from 3 speakers that will share their perspectives on how to bridge the digital divide in low-income countries and also in developed countries as well. So first, I would like to invite our first speaker, Janvi Canoria. She's the Director of Innovation at Education Above All Foundation. Education Above All's key goal is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for vulnerable and marginalized communities, in particular in developing countries. So, Janvi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Aurelio. I hope everyone can hear me. Good morning.
Good morning.
So on the 1st of April, there were 1 billion children in lockdown and out of school. But I just want to rewind us 2 months before that and remind ourselves that on the 1st of February, before we even imagined COVID, there were 263 million children who were already out of school. That's 1 in every 4 children. In addition to that number, 130 million children are finishing 4 years of schooling without learning how to read or do basic arithmetic. Our education system is failing so many of our children. It's just not designed for their context and their circumstances. And what COVID has done has exposed these glaring gaps. But it's also given us a golden opportunity, an opportunity to innovate inclusively. In Education Above All, which is a Qatar-based foundation, we work on helping the world's most marginalized achieve quality access to education towards SDG 4. We work with over 10 million out-of-school children in 70 plus geographies internationally. Last year, we introduced our innovation arm to focus on these unsolved challenges, problems, and design, develop, and pilot new solutions. Our first solution was to focus on out-of-school adolescents. 1 out of every 3 adolescents globally is out of school. 1 out of every 3. We learned very quickly that the rigidity of our system is what was keeping them out of school, and we designed the digital school program. I want to share with you the story of Aisha. She's a 15-year-old girl who dropped out of school at the age of 12 after primary school. She could be anywhere in this world, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Colombia, or Lebanon. सोचिए अगर उसी की तरह आप एक ऐसी कक्षा में बैठे होते जहां आपको कुछ नहीं समझ में आ रहा है. Before you think that there was a technical glitch, I was just trying to show you what Aisha feels as a 15-year-old sitting in a 9th grade class when her real level of learning is that of a first grader. She wouldn't understand anything, and it would sound like Greek to her. Or in this case, it sounds like Hindi. In addition to this compounded learning loss which she faces, she spends her mornings working in the agricultural fields and her evenings cooking for the family. How can someone like her complete her education? So for people like her, we introduced a hybrid self-learning program that utilizes technology to solve some of the core challenges in this context. The first one being flexibility, to learn anytime, any place, and for any duration. Learners can learn in groups in their own village. This minimizes the need to travel distances or the time it requires to get to school, and it accommodates for all the other commitments. The second is personalization, to ensure that the learning starts from their level and they understand what is happening, and then accelerate them quickly to be able to master the core skills, and so also to make learning sensible and relevant to them. The third is recognition, to ensure that this learning is opening up better life paths and goals, whether that's reintegration into the formal system or higher education or vocational or employment. And finally, it is focused on expanding the role of our most valuable and most scarce resource, the teacher. The role of the teacher is distributed to empower self-learning using preloaded offline tablets, peer-led learning using multi-level grouping, and motivation and regular debottlenecking using community facilitators. This really helps focus the role of the teacher and substantially increase her reach. We're trying this model with our partners Pratham in India, and it's been quite successful. And more interestingly, we're realizing its value as a distance and community-led alternative that can help build resilience in our system in times of COVID. Our second solution is completely non-tech. For a second, I want to invite all the educators and parents who have been engaged in distance learning for the last few months to go on a journey with me. Imagine that I took away your superpower. So no more internet. No online schooling, no access to resources, no Zoom calls with teachers, no games, and no videos. Now imagine I took away all your resources too. So no textbooks, well, no books of any kind, no educational toys, no resources. Now imagine that I told you that the parent at home is themselves semi-literate, or because they have commitments to earn a daily living, they cannot be at home and working with the child all the time. This is the reality of more than 50% of the households in the developing world that we work with. No technology, low resources, and parents who cannot become educators overnight. So we were trying to think of a solution for them, and we decided to go back to the basics, project-based learning. Project-based learning is a tried and tested way for engaging self-led and applied learning. The innovation team created IFERB, which stands for the Internet Free Education Resource Bank, which is being now used by over 100,000 learners as of the last 3 months since its conception. Our projects are designed for these contexts. Let me give you an example, the family tree. In creating a family tree, a student would learn geography from where the family migrated, learn genetics as they explore similarities and differences, statistics as they would calculate the average age of family members or percentage of girls and boys, and then of course literacy as they would write them letters. All of this is covered within a week and from home using all the resources and learnings which are available and at their disposal. This is just one of the 80 plus open source projects that we have on our website. We're updating this every week, and we have ensured that it's for children between the ages of 4 and 14. It's loosely tied to all their curricular outcomes, and it's in multiple languages. I do encourage you to make use of it in your contexts. The other interesting innovation for this is teachers who are on the ground and using these projects to be really innovative when they're reaching their children through group phone calls, through SMSs, through WhatsApps, and giving them instructions. When there are no phones available, they're using community-based volunteers or even loudspeakers in their community. And despite all these odds, children are engaged and learning through this emergency. So if I could leave you with one thought today, it is the sense of possibility. The reality is that COVID has exposed the deep-rooted inequities, and it's been a huge setback for us. But it has also unshackled us from the constraints of curriculums, classrooms, and assessments. We have seen miraculous leaps in learning that can happen in short periods of time. Over 35% of the girls who could not read a word are now reading full sentences in less than 4 months. We're being able to engage learners with a flexible model, reducing our dropout rates to less than 10%. Speaking of the IFERB, while we know that many of our parents cannot become educators overnight, we can tap into their practical life knowledge and make them true partners and bring them together on this journey of learning for their children. And unlike all the data that's telling us that 20% of teenagers around the world find school boring, over 90% of the children in our pilot are so engaged in their learning that they're proactively calling their teachers and asking for their tasks for the day. So let me leave you with that possibility, that we can create inclusive innovation and learning experiences for all our 1 billion children, no matter what their contexts are and where they are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanvi. Let's move to the questions. One thing that you brought about the digital school program that was very interesting was the low dropout rate, right? So I would like to ask you how both the tech and the community support have helped to ensure students' engagement, and maybe which lessons we can learn and apply to other contexts, other programs that are struggling to ensure that students are committed to the program.
Sure. I think the interesting thing to note is to just tap into human psyche here. So if you think about these girls who are between the ages of 15 and 20, what would it take to have them continue learning? One of our biggest findings was to have group learning. So actually giving each person their individual tablet was not the solution. The idea was to create a little bit of a community of practice and support. So these girls meet every day, they talk about their problems, they share the tablets, and when they get stuck, they don't give up. But they have, because it's a multi-level group, they have someone else in the group who can assist them and help them as they get through the learning. So that has been one really key factor against the dropouts. The second has been trying to make the learning really visible. So the communities need to see what their girls are learning and how relevant this is for them. So instead of teaching them things which are textbook oriented and not really applicable in their context, it's the idea of bringing learning together, which they can every day use a little bit, and therefore makes it much more interesting and rewarding. And I think those have been really the two big things that I have seen as a shift. Of course, in addition to the fact that the model itself is flexible, so the barriers are much lower. They don't have to travel. They're not meant to spend long hours on learning. And so it also takes into consideration their contexts.
Great, Janvi. Thank you so much for your insights. They've been very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
After listening to these interesting insights about access to technology in education, we're gonna bring now a speaker who will shed light on a slightly different issue where access is not the main problem, but still where the use of technology make other type of gaps emerge. In this case, a gender gap. So let me call on stage Not Nguyen. Not is a senior student at Georgetown University in Qatar and an education above all youth advocate. She is passionate about data-driven advocacy and journalism. So Not, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I assume that would be a yes. My name is Ngọc Nguyen. I am a rising senior at Georgetown, and I'm a youth advocate for Education Above All Foundation. And I'm so grateful to be here among all these experts. I have zero experience compared to them, but I do have a perspective of a student. And like many of you here, I believe the classroom can be an important place to promote social awareness, social equity, and simply to empower students to aspire to a more equal world. Today, I'm talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is participation points. And participation is an era where social biases can translate from society into the physical classroom and from the physical classroom to the online classroom. For example, as a Georgetown student under liberal arts study, we learn not by listening to lectures, but by discussing our readings and theories in class. And the general purpose of participation is to build on top of existing scholarship and to come up with new scholarly arguments. As a result, many professors in my university grade students based on their verbal participation. And this is when we encounter a problem. So one semester after another, one professor would gain the reputation of only listening to male students, or the reputation of grading female students very lowly, or other would be stereotyped as only acknowledging Arab students or white students. And it's also often the norm that only a handful of students who fall in these categories are the only active participants in the classroom. And the issue really intensifies when the purpose of your learning is coming up with new ideas, and getting the professor acknowledgement is equal to getting that mentorship that you need to make your idea into an academic work. This participation bias has several decades of evidence to prove. In the 1960s, Robert Rosenthal of Harvard University performed an experiment to gauge how teachers' expectation affects student performance. He told elementary school teachers that the test could determine which student IQ were about to increase, with a randomly selected group of students to label potential growth. and tested the students' real IQs at the beginning of the year as well as the end of the year. And realistically, you cannot predict which student's IQ was going to really increase with the test. And the result of the teacher believing that some students' IQ is going to increase more will make them put more effort into trying to help those students. And the result of the experiment, and this is in the 1960s, is that after a year, those students who the teachers believe were going to increase in IQ actually increased in IQ, even though initially their selection was random. And this goes to show how in the real world, the example is very similar. Any factor that causes a teacher to have a higher expectation of some of their students and low expectation for others is bound to create results to match, whether it's gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic level, anything that is part of the student background could make the instructor believe that they will be facing setbacks, will actually make them face setbacks. And in a classroom that is as diverse as a university classroom, this is a real issue. And I believe it's an issue everywhere. If you have a mixed gender classroom, for instance, if you have diverse nationalities, ethnicity in your classroom, that is also going to be a problem. And this research has been proven by many other researchers for many decades. A 2015 Times article showed decades of research that prove that teachers spend up to 2/3 of their time talking to male students. They also are more likely to interrupt girls but allow boys to talk over them. Teachers also tend to acknowledge girls but praise and encourage boys. They spend more time prompting boys to seek deeper answers while rewarding girls for being quiet and being nice. Boys are more frequently called to the front of the class for demonstration. And when teachers ask questions, they direct their gaze toward boys more often, especially when questions are open-ended. And we may not notice this in everyday life, but scientific studies have demonstrated emerging patterns that prove these things has been real, has been happening for much of human history now, much of our education history now. And these studies mainly, I do acknowledge that they affirm the biases of American society, but social biases in different places can manifest in different unconscious biases in classroom globally. And I believe that the online classroom can present a chance for us to rebuild better. So in my own experience, ever since university went online, verbal participation components in each classes has generally been removed. For example, in my current literature class, we participate, quote unquote, by writing blogs on a mutual class website. And in this way, regardless of whether students can verbally participate or not, they can still contribute to a class-wide discussion, and almost everyone who writes will get acknowledgement from the professor. But the classroom online is not free from bias. A 2020 study by Brookings showed that when switching to online discussion forums, professors are more likely to comment on the writing of white male students. And again, this is an American context, but apply it to the biases in your own society. When taking online classes, I have also noticed that people who would not speak in person would be less likely to speak in an online classroom. Zoom makes it easier for people to say, this conversation is not for me, and leave. And I know we've all been there. I think hundreds of you are here, but not listening to me right now, because that's the power of a webinar. You can tune out, you can remove yourself from it. But the people who are removing themselves, maybe they are those students who need to be in the conversation the most. This goes to show how giving students a chance to participate is not enough, and that there should be a system of encouragement in which students can feel a notion of fairness within the classroom. And I hope every educator is listening to this, is willing to think about your own personal bias, and maybe in the simplest way, trying to give equal attention and give equal acknowledgement, maybe a little boost for someone who is not speaking enough in class, and encourage for everyone to speak in the same volume to ensure a more diverse conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nog, for this inspirational thoughts. I would like to ask you, based on your experience as a student, what would be some of the steps that a professor could take to make the discussion space more equitable for all students, for all genders?
Thank you, Aurelio. I'm going to take the example of my literature professor because I adore my literature class. And there are three things that I really love when my professor does it. The first thing is to ensure multiple channels of idea expression. And that goes to creating that blog post that is ensuring that if you're unable to speak in class, you can write a blog, or you can reply to someone else's blog, write a comment as if it's on Twitter, and everything counts in a similar way. But that leaves a problem. We still want people to talk similarly, right? And the second thing that he does in order to do this is to ensure that there's some sort of equalized instructor acknowledgement. He treats all inputs as valuable. And if you've ever been in class before, you must have heard someone's opinion that you don't really like. You would think, oh, what are they talking about? You know, like, why are we acknowledging this? But I acknowledge that it's quite mean, but my professor, he replies to everything. He acknowledges everything, and he really understands that everyone is coming from a different perspective, a different culture, and their input in their perspective is very helpful, and it's really hard to do. Even me sitting in a classroom, I don't know how he does it. But sometimes I don't agree with someone. I don't really want to bring them up, but the professor does it, and it's very helpful. The last thing that he does is the gradual encouragement to reach a more diverse discussion. And gradual encouragement means that if someone has a very good blog post and they are not talking in class, he would bring up the blog post in a class PowerPoint, read a passage that is very good from it, and ask the person whether they want to follow up with the class or not. And it's very optional. That means it's no threat. But most of the time, the people will talk and will say something about what they think. And that has brought many people who are more quiet, but who write beautifully to the conversation. And it's really a great conversation that we're having in that class. And I hope all the instructors out there can cultivate the same environment, a safe space where students can participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nok. And I really hope that those tips can be useful for teachers and professors who are listening to us today. So thank you again, Nok. Our next speaker will share some perspectives on challenges that have been presented by our first speaker, Janvi, in the session. So Stéphane Coyer-Matillon, he's the CEO of Kiwix. Kiwix is an open source software that brings internet content to people who do not have access to the internet. So Stéphane, I'll invite you to come on stage to explain a bit more about the solution and the insights that they can bring to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you said, there's about 4 billion people who don't have internet access. So what that means is that when lockdown started here, it was on Tuesday, Monday was fine, and then suddenly, boom, we needed a solution. So imagine now you're in Cebu, in the Philippines, or in Ladakh in India, or even Zatari camp in Jordan, then it's even more complicated because you don't have a teacher, you don't have internet. So all those nice, shiny edtech solutions that have been developed, you don't have access to them. So what we do at QX is we do not provide shiny edtech solutions. We make them available to people. So when someone's building a Ferrari, we just make sure there's a road for the user. We copy the integrality of any website. If it's on the internet, we can copy it. And what we do is that we can compress it and package it. So if you want to have Wikipedia or Khan Academy on your phone, well, that's exactly what we will provide to you. The scenario that happened is exactly what I just described. We were reached out by Orange, which is a large telecom company in West Africa. And they said, well, we've got millions of kids that don't have access to school anymore. And it's definitely not a solution for them to connect to a website where they would learn, because data is expensive. You need to pay for your data. And Orange as well needed to pay for that data. So if you're, say, in Bamako, in Mali, and you want to connect to Wikipedia, then you connect first to Orange, your provider, and then Orange will connect to the Wikipedia server in America. So what they offered was actually to store a series of educational websites that already had made available offline, like Khan Academy and so on, and to offer them at low cost or even zero rating to their clients. So suddenly, within 3 days, that's the rollout it took, everyone could just reach out to a single web page, and then they could pick whatever content they wanted, and they could learn from that. Of course, it's not the perfect solution. The perfect solution, I think it's Jean-Vier that mentioned it, it's having a teacher. But it's the next best, because when you need to scale quickly. You can't really be super picky about what you offer. There's like too many use cases. You need to be able to offer solutions that will match the needs of different users. And therefore, if you try to push a single solution onto them, it just won't work. So that's why we have a platform where we don't produce content, as I said, but we just offer contents with an S. And that's pretty much the gist of it. What you need to do, the learning we had, the brunt of the effort is now past us, so we're moving forward. And there were a couple of good learnings. The first one is that it's not just to say, hey, it's here, it's available. You need to push the information every day, because people have different needs and different days change. So you need to be there for them and communicate on this. The other one is that you need to have a range of solutions. We saw that different countries had different ways of learning, and they were reaching out, even though they all had the same solutions, like in Arabic, in French, and English, we had a panel. You could see that depending on the country, they would reach out to a different type of solution. So it has to match the system you have. You cannot say, yeah, well, it's a whole new world. Let's try something new. No, you need to build on what you have already. So that's the second learning. And the third learning is that you need to care for those that have no resources. If you look at the number, you will see that last year was the first year where broadband access did not increase in the world. If you want to put it differently, when I said that there were 4 billion people that did not have internet access, well, you could look on the bright side and see that there are 4 billion that have internet access. But those, by definition, are the 4 billion of the richest, or middle class at least. And it took 30 years between the invention of the web and 2020 for those that half richest part of the world to get the internet. So how long will it take before the bottom half will get access? It will be a long time. So we will need to have a range of solutions. It cannot be like you have it or you have it not. You need to have something that is in between. You need a gray zone. And that's the third learning for us. And that's about it, really. Offline is there to stay, but it's there to stay only if you can think in the way you conceptualize your product in a way that can be used anytime. And you need to think of your users. That's your bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I'd like to ask you maybe how easy it is to deploy QX somewhere. And maybe if you can also tell, how do people usually update content if they're offline?
So you can deploy it anywhere because it runs on every machine, be it computer, phone, or even like little servers, like hotspots for $100. And the way we saw people updating was very interesting, because when you're based in Europe, you have a very vertical view of things. That is, you connect to the Play Store and you download. If you're in India or Eritrea, which was an interesting case, it's not that, because you don't have internet access at home. So what you do is you go to a cyber cafe and you can actually buy that content for $1. And because that will be the connection point where they will have high speed, and then you can just walk out and share it with your friend. You can share peer-to-peer. I was surprised to hear that in India there's a lot of people that actually share movies from phone to phone, but it actually does make sense. People are very, very reactive, and there's very many ways. So you just need one access point, and then it spreads out.
Perfect. It's great to hear that there are solutions that are applicable both to the developed world and also to developing countries with less resources as well. So thank you again so much, Stefan. Thank you, Nok and Jambi, who participated in this session today as well. I'll now hand it over to my colleague, Elias. Thanks, everyone.
And I was moving to the session of specialist dialogue. I was moving directly to introduce you to your moderator, Mrs. Diane Lee, who is an associate partner with Dalberg Advisors, based in Mumbai. She's a co-lead of the education to employment practice. Her focus areas include early childhood and youth development, gender, health, ICT, and monitoring. She enjoys working at the intersection of strategy and human-centered design, and she's excited about leveraging technology to enhance and scale impact. I leave the stage to Dayong Lee to take you to the next session. Hello, Dayong.
Hello. Hello.
Very good to meet you. The stage is yours to introduce your speakers.
Hi, folks.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, good to see you, Dayong, and sorry for any technical issues. I have introduced you. I have introduced the panel. It's over to you now.
Okay, fantastic. I'm so sorry about that. Some technical issues.
we all have these issues, don't worry.
Yeah. Thank you, Elias. And hi, everyone. Great to meet you all virtually. It's actually super interesting to get some really practical tips around how to bridge the digital and economic divide in the prior session. So thank you for that. And through the various conversations that we've been having at the WISE event over the past few days, I think it's been abundantly clear that COVID-19 has really challenged some of our really deep-seated notions around when, where, and how we deliver education. It's challenged the role of our universities, schools, the role of our teachers, parents, what types of supports our students need, what kinds of learning are most valuable in today's world. And in that process, it's really brought some unlikely actors together to problem solve. For example, when and how to reopen schools is not just an education issue, but it's been a huge public health issue. Global travel policies need to now consider the implications on international students who may be left stranded. Teachers have had to work much more with parents to reach and engage students, and all the additional stresses have made it even more important to draw on the expertise of the mental health professionals and community in designing and delivering lessons. And to, of course, pivot to online teaching and learning, education institutions had to work much more closely with edtech companies, technology providers, and so on. So over the next hour or so, we're running a little bit late, but we'll try to catch up. We're going to be discussing how these different sets of actors can really come together to reimagine education and rebuild it to be more resilient, agile, and inclusive going forward. The format of this session is 2 back-to-back, roughly half-hour conversations with 2 panelists each. And to kick off our chat today, we have Dean Ahmad Dalal, who's already joined us here, as well as Ruben Vardanyan. Dean Dalal is the Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar. He has been spearheading much of the university's efforts to navigate the pandemic. And previously, he's taught at several world-class universities, including the American University of Beirut, Stanford, Yale, and so forth. Ruben is the founding partner of Moscow School of Management, Skolkovo, which is the first private business school in Russia, as well as UWC Dilijan in Armenia. He's also a business leader, social entrepreneur, and a venture philanthropist. So welcome, Dean Dalal and Ruben. Can we have Ruben also on video now? While we wait for him to join, just wanted to preface this conversation by saying that, relative to K-12, higher education institutions perhaps have faced even more pressure to pivot quickly to remote learning because students are more mature to handle online work, perhaps more technologically savvy to adapt to some new platforms. And you've also had to figure out what to do with students who've been living on campus and perhaps face greater, even more financial pressure as offerings are typically higher priced than K-12. There are many more international students that are affected perhaps by the global border closures and so forth. So while we wait for Ruben, I wanted to start off by asking Dean Dalal, and addressing some of these challenges that higher education institutions have been facing. What have been some new partners that you may have started to work with as a result of COVID? And what kind of partnerships have COVID catalyzed in the higher education sector more broadly?
So it's not necessarily new partners. I mean, hello to you, Diane, and to our audience. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel. And sorry for the technical glitches. These are the perils of the new age in which we are operating. So it's not exactly new partnerships, but it's new tasks and challenges that ought to shape and reshape the existing partnerships that we have. I mean, there is a limited pool of partners that we can work with in our various institutions. So the question is really how to reimagine some of these partnerships and redirect them in light of the lessons of the current crisis. Of course, the second important point is that the lessons of the current crisis are not clear as of yet. It will take us time to figure out exactly what's happening and to figure out the long-term consequences and lessons from the current crisis. So we're talking, everything that we're talking about, that we'll be talking about now in the midst of this crisis is tentative. That said, there are probably larger questions that we've been asking previously, not so much in the context of an immediate crisis, but in larger context, and we could draw on the earlier thinking that we've had as we begin to think about the current moment and the future consequences. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic has created a kind of panic everywhere, and including, of course, universities. And if it hasn't, it should. There's something wrong. If people are not concerned, there is something wrong with their approach and understanding of the current moment. But it's also, the current moment has generated lots of interest on how we can use the powerful research arms of the university, the existing fabrication capacities in some universities. This doesn't apply to us. It does apply to many of our partner institutions, Qatar foundations, and of course, universities globally. How to deploy the knowledge resources that universities already have to help facilitate solutions that help people be safer, recover faster, deal with the current crisis, and so on. Mm-hmm. Universities have been responding with what they can offer, fabricating, for example, personal protective equipment or PPE. This is, by the way, our colleagues in Virginia Commonwealth University here in Education City at Texas A&M. They are doing things along those lines, doing research on vaccines. Our colleagues at Weill Cornell are doing something along those lines, funding research that tackles COVID-related research problems. We're doing some of this at GUQ. Our colleagues in other universities are doing some of this as well, providing relevant analysis to help inform decision-making, to help understand the current moment from its multiple perspectives. And again, as I say, this is work in progress. We are at the beginning of this task. We're nowhere close to having final answers. This has provided opportunity for the private and public sectors to come together and share resources to fulfill societal needs. All of this is, of course, very positive. However, it must be noted that the sense of panic cannot be allowed to decenter a university from its long-standing and sacred relationship with academic freedom, entailing the pursuit of knowledge without being driven exclusively or primarily by monetary gain or practical outcomes. There is such a thing as disaster capitalism, where companies and interest groups, and we're seeing it, by the way, unfolding throughout the world, interest groups use disaster to get around public safeguards to make greater profits. I mean, there are people who are trying to make profit from the idea of developing a vaccine or therapeutics for the pandemic. And so when universities are looking to partner with the private sector, they must maintain the rigorous vetting and of course, conflict of interest protocols. Now, this said, certainly there has been increased interest in public-private partnerships as you know, for one thing, because budgets worldwide are constrained and education is increasingly valued. And this happened way before the pandemic, and now it's a little more acute and critical. Education is valued for its return on investment, and quite often this is seen in a very limited fashion. So there are no doubt ways in which public-private partnership can be structured in a balanced way that serves not just the interests of the partners, both the universities and the private sector, but more importantly, the public good. I think this is the primary lesson of the moment we're living. If there is one lesson, I mean, there will be many, many lessons, of course, but if there is one thing which is certain, is that the current pandemic crisis is that, or as a matter of fact, it's not just the current pandemic crisis. Now, as we reflect, it's multiple crises that have plagued the globe, you know, humanity as a whole. The key lesson is that it's not just economies, but it's societies. Economies, I mean, for practical, pragmatic reasons, as we know, economies cannot thrive and flourish without societies, without people, without the individuals that drive them. And if people can't work, there can be no economy. But more importantly, and much more fundamental, is the fact that economies should be in the service of societies. They shouldn't be entities and ends in their own right. So when we think about public good, I say this advisedly, because when people talk previously, when people talk about private-public relationship, the key focus is on maximizing profit and, you know, serving the interests of institutions and whatever. I think we need to center and foreground the idea of public good, the service to society. So the point is, an optimal partnership between educational institutions and private sector ought to be driven by this notion of public good, not by other considerations. Other considerations are important, they're pragmatic, they should be taken into consideration, but what we need to underscore first and foremost is the notion of public good. And if we don't see it now, you know, there is a problem in our thinking, I think, if we don't see the importance of doing this. Now, here at GEQ, if I may, just very quickly say a couple of words about GEQ.
Go ahead.
We run a well-attended executive education public-private partnership open course. I mean, we have open courses. We have a course with Ashghal. We have other courses that are open to the public, and we teach the basics and advanced techniques in selecting projects and comparing the value of a public-private partnership to traditional public sector options. How we use project finance to deliver value for money and consumers, and so on. So we do the traditional stuff, and we actually offer courses at Georgetown in our executive education program on this subject. And as you can tell, there is a lot to these partnerships, and getting them right entails careful thinking and planning. There are other kinds of partnerships. I wouldn't call them private-public. I mean, for example, we are embarking on a partnership with the education above all. It is an organization. It's an organization which is within our own ecosystem within QF. It's not under QF technically, but it's within our ecosystem, and that is driven. That particular kind of partnership, regardless of what we consider the EAA, That is driven by service to the public, by the notion of public good, regardless exactly how we prioritize things without it. And I think these things we need to be now rethink these types of relationships and partnerships in light of the needs of the current moment. So universities can be beneficiaries from public-private partnerships, and more broadly can also inform and guide the way to structure these partnerships. And there is a lot of rethinking that we have to do. COVID-19 has provided public and governmental pressure to develop partnerships and has simultaneously opened up the possibility to engage in virtual relationships with the private sector, which reduces some of the barriers to exchanging and building knowledge between the education and the public-private sectors. For example, to give just one example, again, from our own experience, the Qatar Financial Regulatory Agency just piloted a virtual internship with some of our own students. And, on the previous panel, one of our students was speaking, and it shows the types of interest that we have. But I think this is a broader question. It's not just a question for us at GEQ, it's a question for all of us. Partnerships also have the benefit of breaking down stereotypes. And again, this is very important in the current phase and beyond, both on both sides of the fence, causing us as educational institutions and hopefully the private sector all parties to rethink what services and products they can offer their communities, and how they can exchange perspectives that will strengthen the resilience of the country as a whole. I hope I addressed your question.
Yes, Dindala, that was really insightful. Loved your wording against disaster capitalism and the need to mobilize really around public good service as the core value, rather than sometimes over profits and so forth. And we talked a lot about building the resilience of the system, but I want to shift gears a little bit towards building the resilience and the adaptiveness of your students. You talked a little bit about the executive education program and how you're equipping future leaders to think about private partnerships in the right way. But now bringing it home for each of your students. We heard from Nok in the other session, right? Your Georgetown University student. I was very proud of her.
Proud of our students.
About just her experience and how to kind of be inclusive. But just bringing it home to that classroom level, how can universities better prepare your students for a future of work in these extremely uncertain times? And what kinds of very practical steps need to be taken for students to be able to also adapt this mentality of working across silos and sectors?
Yeah, let me start by saying we are indeed very proud of our students, and they, it's not just the usual, we're proud of our students. I mean, it's really because we look to them to imagine solutions for problems we haven't been able to solve. And we have to recognize that. I mean, we are giving them a world which is full of problems and crises. And we look to them to imagine solutions for these problems. And again, the training, the preparation to do this starts in the classroom, starts now, today, while they are studying for their degrees. Not all universities are prepared to work across silos. But I think there's increasing need and pressure on all of us to do this, to think of ways of working across silos, to break these silos. One of the hallmarks of a liberal arts education is that, and liberal arts education has come under tremendous criticism because of practical concerns, primarily because education has, in the last couple of decades, have been increasingly measured in terms of return of investment, and return of investment not in a broader sense, but in a very narrow monetary sense, monetizing education, monetizing knowledge, and the outcomes of knowledge. And that has resulted in defunding, liberal arts education and defunding the study of the humanities and the social sciences, and working on pragmatic and professional degrees, which, don't get me wrong, are extremely necessary and important. But also liberal arts education is important. And more importantly, what is needed is to train students who are capable of thinking across disciplines, who are capable of thinking outside the box. So one of the hallmarks of liberal arts education is that it prepares students to flexibly adapt to new circumstances, through teaching them critical thinking, problem solving, the sorts of skills that specifically draw on multiple disciplines, not just one discipline, such as the sciences, sociology, economics, and public policy. This means that students who are trained in this way are better equipped to serve as communicators, to cross boundaries and silos, and they can use all of today's modern communication platforms and the knowledge and skills that they're equipped with to bring people together from disparate fields to tackle the same problem and to converse across cultures and across borders. And, if you think there isn't a problem which we can solve within a discipline. Real life problems, by their very definition, cut across disciplines. There is an economic perspective to them. There is a policy perspective. There is a very specific scientific perspective, whether it's health or engineering or what have you, and so on. The reality is the problems that the world faces cannot be solved within one particular discipline, and we need to train students. We all need to train students, regardless of our focus. We need to train students to be able to cross these silos and to work across these silos. Liberal arts education students are, in today's environment, are technologically literate. They're comfortable with change. They understand global currents. They are driven to serve their local communities. And we go back again to the idea of the public good. It is essential. It's central. Not everyone who has a liberal arts degree cares about humanity, but at least there is a deliberate effort to cultivate this talent and within liberal arts education universities. From this, we see that the more universities focus on teaching students how to learn and make community connections through internships and real-life problem solvings, the more they internalize and develop the capacity to reskill if necessary. I mean, we know now we know that on average, students, first of all, do not necessarily work within a field which is directly related to the degree that they receive from the university, and they're likely to change on average careers 4 or 5 times during a lifetime. Also, knowledge is moving very fast, so they need to be long life learners. You cannot just study, get a degree, and assume that that's it, you have everything you need for the rest of your life. You need to re-equip yourself. You need to continue to learn. You need to upgrade the knowledge that you have. In all likelihood, the knowledge you've received in the university will become obsolete in 10 years or 15 years or what have you, and then you need to learn more skills and adapt to a new market. All of these are hallmarks of the type of education that is needed now in today's environment. And I think this is so there are distinct ways to conclude, distinct ways through which universities can prepare students. Teaching students how to think critically, outside the box, to think across multiple disciplines, to think by doing, internships, experiential learning, to continue to learn and acquire and update their knowledge as older knowledge becomes obsolete and new knowledge is deployed. And as I said, solutions to real-life problems will require all sorts of skills. And again, all of this, by the way, to go back to the theme of our panel, all of this requires actually building bridges and working with multiple institutions in the private sector, in the public sector, and across disciplines and silos.
Yeah, thanks, Dean Dalal. I think we knew this, right? It's been coming, the conversation around what new skills are needed, but I think COVID has really pressed urgency for preparing our children and youth for a very different new world. And it's no longer an option or nice to have, it's a must have. Right?
Indeed.
So thanks, Dean Dalal. And we were initially planning to go to a Q&A, but given Ruben hasn't been able to join, I think in the hopes of him being able to join sometime soon, I'm actually going to move a bit sooner to our second panel discussion and perhaps do the Q&A altogether at the end, if that works for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean Dalal.
Thank you.
See you back soon. So now I'm going to invite Rukmini and Rebecca to join us, as well as Ruben, if you are ready. Hi, Rukmini. Hi, Rebecca. Fantastic.
Hi, how are you?
Doing very well. Glad you were able to come on on time. We had some technical challenges earlier. So Rukmini is the CEO of Pratham Education Foundation, where she's been leading change in the education sector in India for the past 25 years and more. She's really been at the forefront of shaping the Indian education sector's response on COVID, both on the ground by working closely with communities and by providing resources and assistance to governments and many other civil society actors. Rebecca Greenspan is the Secretary General of the Secretaría General Iberoamericana and a member of the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work. She's led the UNDP LATAM region for many, many years and is the former Vice President of Costa Rica, as well as Minister of several departments. So really delighted to have you both join this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So perhaps picking up from our chat just now with Dean Dalal, I'd love to get, Rebecca, your perspectives on the need to prepare our students very differently for a changed world. It's not even the future of work anymore. The future is now here, right? From your experience working as part of especially the Global Commission to shape the agenda around the world on future of work, which trends have COVID really accelerated or shifted? And how have you seen different actors come together to address some of these changes?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. And I think that the first thing that I need to say is that probably this is the beginning of the 21st century, really. Centuries don't start chronologically, you know. And I think that many of the tendencies that we were seeing in the Future of Work Commission as tendencies not only deepened but made a qualitative jump towards the 21st century. And so in a way, we carry the gaps that we still had in the 20th century, and we have the new gaps that are arising because of the new reality that COVID-19 and the new technologies are bringing to the educational system. And part of the problem of our countries and the developing countries is that the education is starting to be the main factor for the intergenerational transmission of inequality, because of the gaps that are between the higher quintile of income and the lower quintile of income. That is dramatic, yes? In Latin America, just to give you an example, 2/3 of the school and young students have access to internet, but that is the average. If you go for the lower quintile, you have only 1/3 of that population having access to internet. Secondly, probably these poor families have problems right now because of the COVID-19. Most of these children have been out of school during all this time. Yes. And we know how that translates in the future of education. Already, we have long-term effects of the short-term pandemic because of several things, because of a loss of class and years of schooling already, 3 months, 6 months. You have to add to that strikes or natural disasters in many of the countries. Second, because parents are not able to really help their children in virtual learning very much. And thirdly, because, in rural areas, and we have still very rural societies in the developing world, in the rural areas, the access to internet is even less. And then we have to talk about the reality in the labor market. And that reality in the labor market really has, on one stroke, I think, made obsolete many of the work that were before. I think, one of the main, or the president of the big company in Spain, the big company of internet, said that in 3 months of COVID-19, the deepening of the use of internet was advanced 5 years. So in 3 months, it happened what they expected to happen in 5 years. So you can imagine that large groups of the population and the working population, when they will come back from in the post-pandemic world, they will find they are not needed anymore. So training and short-term training and very specific training will be of the essence for those workers to come back to the labor market with digital skills and with different skills. And I don't think that the governments are really prepared for the huge change in training that will be needed. First of all, because I think that you have to go for a capabilities hiring and not necessarily education or titles hiring, because you need more boot camps and of alike, and the governments are not prepared to use big data to really lead their political and more policy decisions, into the next, the new reality. And unfortunately, I think that can deepen. The COVID-19 is not an equalizer. It will deepen inequalities because of the unpreparedness of the policies and the institutions that need to carry the policies for the new world.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Really sobering, right? Definitely not the great equalizer. In fact, the exact opposite, I think you're implying. And unless other actors like the private sector come together with the government, really unequipped alone to take on this mantle of bridging the divide that's starting to happen, that's going to definitely have long-term consequences if we don't act now. Want to now move to Rukmini and shift gears a bit from the global trends we've been talking about to India. Bringing in your experience working in this sector from several decades ago and now helping the sector navigate COVID. What have been some new collaborations you've seen come up that you hadn't seen before? And perhaps also in taking this lens of making sure we don't leave our children behind.
Thank you so much, De-Jong, for asking this question. I want to just link it to a bit to what Rebecca just said. I think it's very important for us to remember that we are moving forward, carrying with us the gaps of the 20th century and the new gaps that we see in the 21st century. The issue of capabilities versus educational qualifications, I think, has an implication at every level. There's a lot of talk these days that the kind of learning that we expect, academic learning, is taking a big hit because of school closures, because of economic hardship in families. But I think at the same time, there is an increased learning that children are getting just from the circumstances that they are in. And perhaps it is those learnings which are developing a kind of more resilient or a flexible capability that may be useful. So one of the things that we've been contemplating in India is that when schools open, of course, the schools should go back to trying to rebuild, the lost time and the lost capabilities. But we should probably also think very hard about what are the capabilities that children are bringing in. In India, you must have seen pictures of migrant families who are walking for, hundreds and thousands of kilometers to reach home. Many of them have children with them. And I think in that journey, people have learned a lot about how to manage adversity, scarcity, fear, and what can be done to kind of bring this to a productive kind of a form that values these kinds of experiences, which actually a lot more of these experiences have happened in the poorer communities than in the richer communities. So I don't know, when Rebecca was talking, these are the thoughts that came to mind. But going back to the question that De-Jong, you asked me, at the ground level, we've seen some very interesting things in the last 3 months. One of my colleagues put it very nicely that, we are used to face-to-face work with children and communities and schools. We work all over India. And although we are now further away because we are all at home, in many ways we have come closer. And we've come closer because we've been wanting to connect. So I want to maybe put out three new kinds of collaborations that we see. Some are obvious and common sense, but they were not happening before. One is parents. Now, at the elite end, educated end of this whole parent continuum, you see parents in cities who are trying to engage with children and whatever is happening online from their schools. The same kinds of parents perhaps were not as deeply involved in the learning process. They were used to giving devices, having coaching classes, bringing books, but perhaps not as on a daily basis involved with, is my child learning or not? And at the far end of the continuum, where we are working with parents who are not particularly educated, but who are getting a little SMS message on their phone, on their basic phone, not even a smartphone. And that SMS message is asking the family to do, let's say, we sent out a message recently which said, how much water do you use in your household every day? If you were to measure it in buckets, how many buckets for washing, cleaning, cooking, and so on? And we were flooded with phone calls from parents who said, is it okay if we measure it in jugs and not in buckets? Things like, yesterday we didn't wash clothes because there was not enough water. So, this involvement we see as very important for us, because while parents, especially uneducated parents, have been a key part of ensuring schooling, that children go to, they enroll, they attend, they have not been brought in to the center of learning. And one of the reasons they're doing it right now is because everybody realizes that you have to do more and you have to do things that you did before. And if your kids are at home, you're concerned about their learning. So this is not exactly a cross-sector coalition, but in a very important way it is, that we recognize that parents are as important as schools in harnessing this energy for, even at the primary level, for education. The other two that I just mentioned in passing is that, we usually collaborate with others in the education sector. But during this COVID, we've had opportunity to reach out to other organizations, particularly in the livelihood space, women's self-help groups, all kinds of organized groups. And we find that everybody has children at home. Our education minister put it really well, that we have 330 million students in India. And if you add to that 2 parents, then you get up to 1 billion. So this is a question that affects everyone. And everyone must be part of this broader coalition to see how do we take our young people ahead. And finally, I think I would say that because of this suddenness and the unanticipated nature of this crisis that hit everybody all of a sudden, I think a lot of reasons for collaboration. We work a lot with our governments, different state governments in India, and we find that the openness to coming up with solutions is far higher now. And so to me, I think a big challenge moving ahead is how do you maintain these spaces to continue to be open? We are soon going to fall into some kind of a routine way of moving forward. But in that routine way, how do we maintain these extra efforts that we are seeing on all sides? And how do we harness the energy of those, whether at the ground level with families or at the higher level with governments and others?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Sorry, Rebecca, did you want to directly respond to something?
Yeah, I wanted to know that I think that Rukmini is right, that there is more openness now for change, and that we have to take advantage. It's an opportunity. And bringing multi-actor coalitions and multi-level coalitions also in government is key for facing this challenge. And I think that the private sector can, as you said before, Dayun, can play a very important role in this. Mm-hmm. In Latin America, for example, we are seeing coalitions of businesses that call themselves businesses for education, for example. Mm-hmm. The problem is that is businesses for education, but the connection with the policy part is not really strong. Or policy with the different levels of government and making the difference between rural and urban, for example, is not there. So I think that there, organizations like ours can play a role, because we can bring the different actors together in a more and potentiate the dialogue that can come from that interaction. And probably that, as it is also the case in the SDGs, yes, you need the multi-actor coalitions and the multi-level coalitions to make the change. And I think that what Rukmini was saying about the parents is very important, about the local level is also very important. My only question, Rukmini and Lee, is that I am afraid that this will bring women again to bear the whole burden of the education and the challenge that we are facing. And I wouldn't like that. I think that an effort has to be made for a shared responsibility, yes. And this, with the COVID-19, where we call the population to stay at home, yes, now in the post-pandemic, I am aware that many women will stay at home after the pandemic, because, again, the burden on the children, because schools are not working, because of teleworking, because of tele-education is in, women will suffer again in obstacles to join the labor market, to be independent economically, and the issues of violence, etc., are to be taken into account.
Yeah. Thanks, Rebecca.
I wanted to just take this idea of shared responsibility. I think that, Rebecca, you mentioned this absolutely, that it has to be shared by different people, by men, women, old, young. There has to be a shared responsibility. And in some ways, I've been very thinking hard about this. How do you keep a space open? How do you keep the energy that new things need to come in? How do you keep that open? And perhaps there are two ways, and I'm sure you all will add to it. One is there needs to be a common agenda, a shared responsibility for a common agenda. Now, the common agendas may vary from context to context, but the name of my organization is Pratham, and Pratham means primary or first. And I was thinking, just in a very simple way, think about the class of 2020. The children who are going to go to first grade this year are a special cohort, because they should have been looking forward to going to school, and nobody really knows how that is going to be. It is the same cohort that is going to be in 10th grade in 2030, and which is our SDG kind of timeline year. And if we imagine what we have to do for a very successful transition and journey from 2020 to 2030, that may capture many of the worries that we have. So, this was just an example about how can we have a common agenda that people can share. The agenda has to be wide and simple for shared responsibilities, and people have to feel at every level that I, as the grandmother, can contribute, and so as a CEO can contribute. So how do we have this common agenda? And I think spaces stay open when new people come into the space, and when the old people can see that new people coming in is bringing in new energy. And so I think that is across the board, across sectors. How do we capitalize on what we have? We have all scrambled in different ways in the last couple of months. And we need to systematize the scramble, but we need to keep the doors open so that more people can come in to share and to unify.
Completely agree. Yeah, I think that there is an opportunity. And I think that this relates to the former speaker in terms of bringing again education as a public good and as a keystone in the project of society, yes, and putting it again in the center of the political agenda too. And that is true that this pandemic opens the door again for that discussion, because the public is the public sense, public in the larger sense, is coming again to the agenda because of health and education. And I think that we have to take advantage of that opportunity, no doubt.
Yeah. I really liked the idea of leaving the space open and welcoming in new people and capitalizing on that new energy to also put education right back at the center of the political sphere. It's taken a back seat in many cases. And I think it was important to note, Rebecca, your point around potentially the dangers of doubling down on what you're good at. Perhaps women and mothers right now, it's natural for them to be the primary caregivers versus the fathers. And if there are, additional care responsibilities for children, that goes to women. But perhaps that's not okay, right? If it's perpetuating inequalities. And so how do you both draw on individual strengths, but make sure responsibilities are shared at the end of the day, and we're not exacerbating inequalities? I think is a really important kind of lesson for us to keep in mind. I'm mindful of time. We have about 10 minutes left in this session. There's so many different threads that we can go into. Loved also the point, Rukmini, you made around strength-based versus deficit-based approach. The children who are actually at the base of the pyramid have some of the most resilience given their adversities that they've already been living with. But how do you codify that, and how can you help the education system, but also the employment market and the sort of broader society value that, and so forth. But did want to also give a chance to our audience to take some of the conversations to where they want to bring in. So at this moment, I'm going to take the liberty as moderator to bring back in Dean Dalal. And unfortunately, I think we have lost Ruben in the process. Is that right, WISE team? I think so.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately. So really sorry. I'm sure he had some great insights to share. But if Dean Dalal is ready, we'd love to get him. Hello. Back.
Hello, I think I am ready if you hear me.
Excellent. So I think that the points that were just brought up by Rebecca and Rukmini around the importance of bringing in parents really resonated with our audience here. So question we have for you is, what kinds of programs or best practices can we really deploy to better engage parents and bring them also along in this educational journey? Use this moment as an opportunity to do that much better. Maybe I'll start with Rukmini and then open it up for whoever else wants to chime in since we started that thread.
I mean, I think that I think there are all kinds of continuums. I spoke about the educated to the uneducated continuum and how parents can come in different ways. There is also, what role can parents play at the higher levels of education versus at the primary levels. But I think everywhere across families, people are worried about the future. And when you're worried about the future, you are willing to try new things. You're willing to look at new opportunities. And this idea that I think how we can promote this idea that it's capabilities and enterprise that is going to be really the key features, because those are things that you use in your daily life. Most people who are true entrepreneurs learned it as they were kids or teenagers in their neighborhood and in their families. And really, how do you build these as important parts of things that both education systems can do, as well as just, our social structures can focus on?
Yeah. Anything else to add, Dean Dalal or Rebecca, on that question?
Please, Rebecca.
Ahmed, I lost a little bit there, Lee, sorry, the question.
Yeah, and perhaps, Rebecca, from your perspective, you talked about the need to bring education at the center of the political agenda. It's not often a voting agenda, right? And therefore, some of the key reforms get pushed back. And perhaps there's a role for parents there. How do you engage parents so that this becomes a much more top of the political agenda?
Yeah, I think that we have different situations here. I would say I come from a country where parents have been very involved in education, because education have been at the center of our national project, always, yes? And even so, when we went through the crisis of the 80s, we realized in the 90s how bad the crisis hit the possibilities of learning of students. And we didn't realize how deep was the dropout of school, also in high school and primary schooling. And I think that now we need to engage again with, as you said, parents, because this can happen again in this crisis. We are very worried of a high degree of dropout in all the learning curves, primary, secondary, and university. You know, Latin America has the highest dropout of university students of the world. So we have brought low-income families into university for the first time, for the first generation, but they are dropping out of university also. It's not only primary schooling that we are worried about in terms of our future, yes? And probably you are right that we need to bring parents again in the commitment to education, to make all efforts for children to stay in and not drop out. And probably we haven't done that lately. We have taken that as a given. And I think that hearing Rukmini and yourself, we need to look much more deeper into that and how to bring back parents into the fight, you know, of staying, of the new generation staying in the school system. So I take that from this conversation, that we need to do more in that sense, not only the private sector, but also primarily the parents, you know, the families that are so key for what will be happening.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Just in the interest of time, I'd love to move to another question, which I think goes back to both what Dean Dalal said around the need for this public good service mindset, as well as what Rukmini, you talked about in terms of creating openness and open spaces for new people to join in, right? But very practically speaking, you know, each organization has its own agenda. Businesses have to make profits, right? And so how do you let go of some of your core values and actually create an open mind around what might be actually, you know, in the end of the day, beneficial for society? What are some practical ways that you can do that? And perhaps I'll start with Dean Dalal here.
Sure.
Not theory, but how?
Yeah. So perhaps I could also connect to the first question, and also build on what my colleagues have highlighted in their previous remarks, which is the importance of having a local perspective and mobilizing local resources. I mean, being aware of the local issues and the local problems and mobilizing local resources. So in educational institution, there are two primary tasks. We train students, and then of course we do research. At the level of training students, I think the ultimate purpose should be, and again, this is a point which is accentuated by the current pandemic crisis, but not just the pandemic crisis, the racial crisis, the issues that marginalized communities are facing, you know, within individual societies, but also at the global level and so on. I think the ultimate purpose should be to train citizens who are engineers, good citizens who are engineers, good citizens who are medical doctors, or whatever they are. But they're good citizens first, and they're good citizens by attending to the needs of their families first and foremost. I mean, you know, it's completely legitimate to care about. I mean, if we think of the ability to provide for your family, if you think of return on investment in this particular sense, there is nothing wrong in it. Of course, you know, people want to go to a university and come out and be able to sustain and support their families, and then also serve their communities and their societies, and by doing so, they'll be doing a service at the global level as well. So these agendas are not necessarily in conflict with each other, but it is a problem when they are positioned in conflict with each other. So I think having a local perspective, being attuned to a local perspective, is extremely important. And this is where, theoretically at least, local business as opposed to global business, local capital as opposed to global capital, you would think that local business is more, and especially small businesses might be more attuned to global issue, to the needs of society, to the needs of the families and societies and so on, than a global business would be. And just again to talk about this very specific example, when we talk about education, I think one thing that we need to underscore is education as a right, as a human right. And there is a great initiative out of Qatar, through Education Above All and Leave No Child Behind. I mean, and there are many partners, many global partners in this initiative. This is a primary problem across the globe, the lack of access to education. And when we think, we're in a privileged situation here. I speak, I'm in a well-funded institution. We have resources available to us. Not everyone has these resources. Not everyone has the capacity to connect on a Wi-Fi platform. This is where, as my colleagues have been saying, this is where the families have a role to play. This is a collective effort. You need to look for local solutions for these problems, because these global solutions might work in some contexts, but they don't work in many, many other contexts. And we need to think of the local solutions. We're proud of one of our students who have developed an application, around the project. He's developed a tablet for literacy and numeracy. He had put on this tablet the first 2 years programs, and he's deploying these tablets in remote areas in Pakistan and northern Pakistan, where people have no access to education, in villages and whatever. And it's a way of little kids who are working, who cannot afford to walk several miles to the nearest school. He's bringing the school to them on a tablet that costs $8 or something in this order, and a tablet which has been programmed to reflect their local situation. And this is a way of engaging their families and, within the small ecosystems in which they operate. But I think the local perspective is extremely important, and as my colleagues have understood.
Thanks. We have now, I think, come at time, but this has been a really rich discussion. I think lots of really excellent ideas, both to strengthen existing partnerships and form new ways of working within the usual set of actors, but also really take advantage to open up the space and bring in new partnerships, perhaps existing important stakeholders like parents, really give them a voice and a role. And I also really like the idea of not only trying to shift things and how do we change things for the future and the better, but leveraging what already we have, the strengths we've built, the common values of, at the end of the day, students as good citizens, and education as a human right, leaving no child behind, principles that we already know are important. How do we double down on some of those to adapt better for a different world? And how do we make sure we don't just fall back as business as usual, but really take advantage of all of these rich opportunities to build differently? So thank you so much, Dean Lalal, Rebecca, Rukmini, and really sorry that we didn't get to hear from Ruben, but hope there are many more opportunities like this. And just also wanted to thank the WISE platform. We talked about bringing different stakeholders together, and I thought this was such a lovely way of hearing from global, local, higher education policy, K-12, early childhood, all in a span of 1 hour, and goes back to just the importance of these types of conversation openers to build a common language and perspective and share some of the information and insights. So thank you, WISE team, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That was a great informative session. Once again, thank you to the moderator. I was looking at the comments coming from the community, and I felt a great sense of engagement. So that's very interesting to see. So this is the end of the morning session. we started our forum today. We had the honor of hearing from Ms. Yang Lan, the chairperson of Sun Media Group, who underlined the purpose of education as a means of holistic growth and the social development of children. I think we can all agree that social and emotional learning is so important, and we will need to involve stakeholders from across our communities if we are to see this as a central component of future learning. We also heard from Jamvi Kanoria, who is, as a mean of reminder, she's the Director of Innovation at Education Above All Foundation. She spoke about how COVID-19 highlighted deep-rooted inequalities in our education systems, inequalities that have long existed before this pandemic, actually. However, as she demonstrated, this crisis has also challenged us to be more resourceful with the tools we have at hand so that we can support all learners, no matter their economic or social backgrounds. And finally, in our panel led by Maria Spice, the co-founder and co-CEO of Holland IQ, we explored trends around EdTech. Interestingly enough, an audience poll during this panel showed over a third of attendees today thought that the greatest impact on education innovation over the next 5 years would come from government policy and funding rather than from schools or private capital. Let's wait and see for the next 5 years to see this. It will be interesting to see how EdTech and entrepreneurs begin to work more closely with government, particularly as we move out of this pandemic. As a way of reminder, dear community, we have the afternoon session that will start at 6 p.m. Doha time, so in less than 6 hours. And just to give you a sense of what we will have speakers, the second part of Holland IQ with Patrick Brother, the other co-founders and co-CEO. We will hear from Vicky Colbert, the founder of Escuela Nueva and the 2013 Wise Prize laureate. We will also hear from Cherry Weston from the Sesame Workshop, and also Christos Stylianides, European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. We look forward to welcome you back in the evening. For now, I wish you a great day, a happy day, and I hope we connect with you again at 6 p.m. Doha time. Thank you very much.